Or go ahead. We're good. Okay. Welcome, everybody. Full house today. This is Wednesday, February 27th, the regular meeting of the Pitkin County Board of Commissioners. Commissioner Clapper is not here with us today. We're going to move on without her. The very first thing we have is a proclamation recognizing March 11th to the 15th as Colorado Nonprofit Week. And I have a proclamation here, which I'm prepared to read unless one of you would like to read this. Does anybody have a desire, or do you want me to just push?
You're the chairman.
Well, I'm the chair, but I want to make sure that you don't think I'm seizing. Yeah, okay, so here we go.
One of the perks of being the chairman.
Do you all want to stand up? Oh, look who's here to receive it.
Agencies here.
Excellent.
So if you wanted to,
I would love to invite nonprofit agencies up to join us up here. Thank you. Thanks, Nan, for arriving to save me. Okay, come on up. See, I could have rushed into that and just ruined the whole thing.
I would have done my hair.
Come on over. Yeah. Maybe line up probably along the wall over here, maybe. So Pat will rush down and take a photo, or John will snap a picture. Look at this. Oh, we've got a few of you here. In fact, it's most of you. Okay. Thank you, Nan. Sundin, thank you for alerting me to that and bringing everybody in. Proclamation of the Board of County Commissioners of Pitkin County, Colorado, saluting all local nonprofit organizations during the month of March, with March 11th through the 15th, 2019, designated as Colorado Nonprofit Week. Whereas, as the week of March 11th, 2019 has been designated as Colorado Nonprofit Week in the state, a time for Colorado residents to honor, praise, and publicize the broad impact of nonprofits' work in Colorado. And whereas Colorado Nonprofit Week is a time to thank board members, volunteers, and staff who work so hard year-round to make a positive difference. And whereas the Roaring Fork Valley boasts more than 400 local nonprofit organizations that enrich our community by promoting and perpetuating programs that enhance the health and welfare of our citizens, inspire hope and strength and resilience, coordinate community resources, enrich our lives with arts, culture, and recreational activities, serve as our voice for our open spaces, forests, rivers, animal life, and historic landmarks. Whereas many local nonprofits are partners with Pitkin County government in responding to and addressing the problems of our communities, and without these nonprofit organizations, the cost of our government and taxpayers to meet the needs of our citizens would be far greater. And whereas, given the volatile federal and state funding realities currently, the nonprofit sector in the Roaring Fork Valley needs the financial support and encouragement of individuals and corporations during 2018, it says, I'm going to say 2019 as well, to meet the ongoing social support and financial needs of our citizens at this time. Now, therefore, be it proclaimed that the Board of County Commissioners is proud to salute all local nonprofits during March 2019, this month a special recognition for the work of nonprofits, and formally encourages Pitkin County residents to take the time now and throughout the year to thank our nonprofits for the work they do for all of us. Dated this 27th day of February 2019. Thank you all. I guess we can invite everyone here to say who they're with, and I can invite my other commissioners to comment as well, but why don't we start over on this end?
Yeah, hi, Peter Barclay with Aspen Community Foundation.
Allie Hager with Aspen Center for Environmental Studies.
I'm Erin Galbraith with KDNK Community Radio.
I'm Lindsay LaFaro with the Buddy Program.
Kelly McNicholas Curry, your news commissioner, and my whole career has been in public interest, so I know how much you guys all give of yourselves every day in the work that you do, so thank you so much.
So Steve Child, Pitkin County Commissioner. Good to meet those of you who I haven't met.
You already know me. George
Newman, Pitkin County Commissioner.
I'm Sandy Heron, Shining Stars. Liz Means, A Way Out for Addiction Care.
Janelle Duhon, Recovery Resources for the Detox here in Aspen.
Diane Welter, supporting cancer patients in Aspen to Rifle.
Eric Sandoval with Alpine Legal Services.
I'm Lindsay May with Mine Springs Health in Pitkin County.
Lisa Yorker with the Healthy Community Fund.
Great. Thank you all for coming in. Do we have a photo? Jason, you need a photo for the cover of your paper? Where are you? You don't know if he's here. Put him on the
Why
spot.
don't we get all of you
Can we
guys
get
over
line-
there?
Why don't you all line
One-
up? We'll get
one
a
big
group
bunch.
photo. with
Okay.
a plaque. We'll figure something out. Come on and get up there. Squeeze in and release. Don't go on. I don't
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's usually how photographs work. All people go in the very back.
Set us up there, John.
Okay, hold on, there's phones being passed. I'd like everyone alphabetical, no, just kidding.
You don't have to punch it.
Okay, everyone look over this way. 1, 2, 3.
I already took 3 pictures.
So part of Nonprofit Awareness Week is that we're going to be running an ad from the Healthy Community Fund about how the money is being spent in 2019 in our partnerships. As well, there's a regional human services meeting that's going to be focused on, what, Lisa? It's
Western Slope.
West Slope Philanthropy Days. So, so those are some of the events, and we needed to have the proclamation early because most of these people will be at that meeting. So thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Maybe she should be the protector of that. Yeah. Good to meet you. Yeah. All right. Thanks for coming, everyone. Okay. I think moving right along here, additions or deletions to the agenda. John Peacock.
There are no additions or deletions to the agenda today.
Okay. So we're going to go into public comment here. If I may, I'd like to mention that item number 7 on our land use, the resolution granting approval to Helvetic Endeavors, is going to be continued to with the second reading of the ordinance, public hearing. I know somebody's here who would like to comment on that, but maybe we could assure you that you'll have your opportunity later. Just want to put that in case you don't want to sit around. So that's the news there. Okay, Joe, are we okay with that, or?
Well, normally you don't take comments at first reading.
Right. You'd have to come up if this gets long, but I was going to say, we will be taking public comment.
I'll come up quickly.
Okay. So, welcome. Joe Wells.
Joe Wells, coordinator of the Castle Creek Caucus. I'm unclear as to whether you're going to take comment on the resolution today or treat it as essentially a first reading kind of situation, which you don't normally take comments.
I think we were not going to today, but I want to confirm this with Jeanette.
Yeah.
Typically, when they follow with an ordinance, then they send a resolution to the second reading with the ordinance.
So Joe, there are 2 items, and my understanding is the resolution, which would be a 1 reading item, the board would continue to the same date as the second reading of the ordinance and take public comment on both at the same time.
Well, that was my understanding, but I just wanted to be sure.
Thank you.
Thank
now
you
I
very
understand. Okay. All right. Moving right. Thanks, Joe. Public comment. We have a special guest here from Senator Bennett's office, John Whitney. I'd like to bring you up first. If we could get your public comment first. You have someone with you.
Thanks, Greg. Great to see you and great to be here. John Whitney, Western Slope Regional Director for Senator Michael Bennett. Also joined by my colleague.
Alyssa Logan. I'm with Senator Michael Bennett's office in Grand Junction.
Welcome, Alyssa. John.
We just wanted to give a couple quick updates, then happy to take questions, thoughts, criticisms, whatever's on your mind. First, wanted to thank you guys for your great letter you sent us on the shutdown and the impacts in your community. We certainly wholeheartedly agree with you. The shutdown was a fiasco and gave a lot of significant damage to communities, federal agencies, federal employees. We're certainly glad it's over. Some of you may have seen Senator Bennett took to the Senate floor in a spontaneous speech on on the topic that ended up getting quite a bit of exposure. I think it set the record for most views ever on C-SPAN for a speech from the Senator House floor, so it clearly resonated, and I think his letter echoed what your letter said, or his speech echoed what your letter said. It just, you don't shut the government down and do that for such nonsensical reasons as happened this last time. A couple other quick things I wanted to mention. You know, we do now have the CORE Act introduced. Thanks again, Greg, for attending the Senator's event. For those of you who haven't seen just our walk piece on it, I'll pass that around so you can see. Yeah, we had a great launch of the event there with Greg, other county commissioners, and leaders from around the state to get the bill launched. The bill will protect 400,000 acres of public land in Colorado, and the bill was really hammered out by local communities like yours around Colorado coming together, rolling up their sleeves with a collaborative spirit, compromising and putting together the four pieces of that now comprise the CORE Act. Here, of course, locally, the Thompson Divide Withdrawal Act, as you guys know from your decade-long advocacy for that bill, is included. We're excited to see that move forward. If passed, the overall bill would represent the largest set of new protections for Colorado's public lands in 25 years. So excited to get that underway, and thank you for your support for it. A couple other quick updates. The omnibus appropriations bill that we did agree to end the shutdown does fully fund PILT, so we're in good hands for that. SRS, unfortunately, Secure Rural Schools, was not reauthorized, so there's some uncertainty there. If we don't pass something soon, we'll revert back to the old 25% royalty system for counties and school districts. You, of course, here are some of the few counties in Colorado and the White River National Forest that don't see a big cut when we revert back to the 25% system. Most counties in Colorado, the average cut is 80%, but on the White River, the royalty stream is quite different, so you guys wouldn't see a cut. But it's we, of course, think Secure Rural Schools is a much better way to move forward on it. One piece of legislation I wanted to give you an update that is a big priority for Senator Bennett, and in my personal opinion is perhaps the most important piece of legislation that he carries, would have the biggest impact on the most people's life, and it's his child tax credit legislation. And he introduced it last Congress with Senator Brown of Ohio. We're going to reintroduce it here shortly, and it would really dramatically expand the child tax credit and really revamp it in a pretty dramatic way. It would ramp it up to $3,000 per year, and it would make the credits refundable and distribute them monthly. So families would now get something akin more to like a $300 direct refundable payment, or they would get the payment directly every month rather than just getting it at the end of the year when their taxes are done. And we really think, Senator Bennett really thinks that this bill would go a long way to addressing childhood poverty in this country. Some of the academics that have studied it would argue that it would virtually eliminate extreme poverty by putting that money in families' hands. So we're very excited about that. I think it's one of the most important bills we work on. And with that, I'm happy to pause, take questions, comments, thoughts, criticisms, whatever's on your mind.
Looking around the room here, anyone?
I'll just mention, I was late this morning because I was so engaged in watching yet another media. The house of cards are falling. Let's just put it that way. Reminded me of the days of Watergate. But since John and Alyssa are here, and we talked about the CORE Act briefly. The CORE Act, for those who are not familiar with it, it's the Colorado Outdoor Recreation and Economy Act. And it's really a win-win. It's a win-win for environmentalists, it's a win-win for recreationalists, and it's a win-win for our economy. And it's a public lands bill that not only establishes new wilderness areas, areas that have actually been identified in the past as wanting and needing and deserving those special designations, but also it includes an oil and gas withdrawal from public land, specifically the Thompson Divide that we've been working on for over a decade. And again, the Thompson Divide is again known for its unique landscape its importance to ranchers, to the recreationalists, and to the local economy. So it's a critical part of this bill. I think that Colorado is our future is really tied to how we view and how we use our public lands, and the Core Act will help address this for our current and our future generations to come. And we've sent a letter in support of the Core Act, along with many of our other elected officials around the Western Slope. So I think it's indicative that this has been a very collaborative effort. It's seen compromises over, as John mentioned, 4 separate bills that have now been rolled into one unified bill to address a lot of the concerns, needs, and wants of our Colorado communities. And I'll just end with, I think, Steve, as you go to Club 20, the Grand Junction, you may just be able to inform and educate some of the concerned citizens over there that the Core Act actually does not include any public lands in Mesa County. And contrary to the Mesa County Commissioner's remarks, the Thompson Divide is not being designated as a wilderness area. So the sky will not fall down on Grand Junction or Mesa County as the Core Act hopefully passes.
Comment, Steve?
So what George is referring to, for those of you in the audience, tomorrow and the next day are Club 20 meetings in Grand Junction. And Club 20 is much more than just Mesa County, although there are a lot of people from Mesa County who go there, and the Grand Junction Sentinel covers it very closely. But Club 20 does represent 22 counties in the western part of this state of Colorado, where these 4 different projects are all scattered around different parts of western Colorado. On another note, I would like to thank Senator Bennett for taking what I think is the right approach to dealing with bipartisan issues. He's willing to sit down and have discussions with people no matter which, and he really sets a good example for what I would like all of our senators and representatives to act in the same way, as well as members of the executive department. I wish they would do the same. And I just want to thank him for the good example that he has set.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. And I mean, that's certainly Senator Bennett's philosophy and style in the Senate. He works across the aisle, has a great working relationship with Senator Gardner. One other thing I wanted to mention that we've worked on that your county has weighed in on is the reauthorization of the Land and Water Conservation Fund, and that's a perfect example of where we worked very closely with Senator Gardner and a number of other Republicans in the Senate to get that done. The Senate a couple weeks ago passed a public lands package that includes that LWCF reauthorization. We got the good news yesterday that the House formally passed it, so the Land and Water Conservation Fund, assuming the President signs the bill, which is anticipated, will be back on the books. It had expired back in December. So we're excited to see that come back online. I'll pass out just a summary of that bill and priorities that we got for Colorado for you all. LWCF is certainly the most significant thing, but there are some other good things, including a 21st Century Conservation Service Core Acts will enable our public land cores, that you work with the college students and others and get them out doing good projects on public lands. They've got a lot of crews that work with veterans that have returned from their service to our country, and they use those cores as an opportunity to get trained in things like fire mitigation and get their chainsaw certification and things they need to pivot to a successful job as a federal firefighter. So we're excited about that. One other piece of specific legislation I wanted to mention as well. We've been working for quite some time on the Farm Bill, and one specific provision that we worked on in that piece of legislation very much with Colorado resort and mountain communities in mind is something called the Forest Service Flexible Partnerships Act. And what that bill would authorize is would allow the Forest Service to lease underutilized properties and accept in-kind contributions and work from local communities to set up housing projects. I know you guys struggle with the housing issues, as does a lot of Western Colorado. So we're excited that this law is on the books. We are working with the Washington Office of the Forest Service on implementation of this provision. They're going to work with the forest supervisors and see what parcels could be appropriate for this use on the White River National Forest. I know that Supervisor Fitzwilliams was someone we worked closely with on the development of this legislation, and I think he's got his eye on several parcels on the White River that might make sense for this. I want to make clear this is not like public lands up in the forest. These are like old, unused Forest Service administrative sites. And the way it could work is, there could be a building there that folks could come together from the community, rebuild the building, turn it into affordable housing, and then the value of that work could count towards the lease from the feds to get a long-term, like 100-year lease, 200-year lease to use it as housing. So we're excited about that. The whole national program really came out of discussions on the White River National Forest, and now that it's law, we look forward to doing that. So if you guys know of any specific parcels in Pitkin County that you'd want to discuss for that, we're happy to help facilitate a conversation with the Forest Service on that. And then I did just want to pass out, I talked earlier about the child tax credit bill. I want to pass out just a more detailed fact sheet just because we are so excited about this bill. Like I said earlier, I don't know of a single bill that Michael carries that would impact more people's quality of life and ability to survive financially in the world than this. So we're incredibly excited about it and looking forward to its reintroduction in the Senate. So I'll pass that out. And then lastly, I also just wanted to mention we've just restructured slightly on the western slope as far as how we organize ourselves and represent ourselves through Michael's staff. And so in the future, the main office that you guys will work most directly with will be out of our Grand Junction office. And Alyssa here works out of our Grand Junction office, and that's why she's here with me today, just to meet you guys and do introductions. And always feel free, of course, to reach out to me as well. I know I've known a lot of you for a long time, and I work for Michael on the entire western slope, but Grand Junction will be more your day-to-day go-to office in the future.
Great. I wanted to follow up with Kelly. Did you have a comment or a question that you want to add on to anything in here?
Sure, I do. And I don't know if I'm on. Okay. I was going to raise this in commissioner comments, but since you're here and it has to do with federal rulemaking, we discussed yesterday in our work session concerns that I have about the Title X rule that the administration has passed or is advancing. The reproductive health community is calling this a gag rule, and it would affect funding for Title X facilities on family planning matters. We do have a facility here in our county, Community Health Services, that we contract out for those. This effort could effectively defund Planned Parenthood and could affect, where individuals and families in our communities seek family planning resources. And so, as you would know, but for the public, what it would do is prevent any mention or referral about abortion services, even by providers who do not provide abortion. So that's what our community facility does here. Community Health makes referrals to where someone might seek abortions. They are not an abortion provider. Garfield County contracts out with Planned Parenthood for their family planning services, and abortions are never federally funded, but Planned Parenthood offers a whole bunch of other services to help keep them whole. And if they're not able to offer those services, it could effectively shut those clinics down. So, we had planned, you'll see a letter from us forthcoming to you. And I was going to, suggest the public reach out to their reps on this, but if you want to speak to that.
Sure. Well, we stand with you. I mean, Michael is a strong supporter of Planned Parenthood and family planning, and anything that would defund Planned Parenthood he would not be comfortable with, and he's taken action on that in the past. And after we get your letter, we'll certainly review it and give you guys an update on what we're doing on this particular Title X rule. But in general, I can assure you, we're all big fans and advocates of Planned Parenthood and know how critical their work is in communities.
Thank you.
John, I did have a follow-up question regarding the CORE Act. I've been trying to find the right numbers to present. I'm going to be in Grand Junction tomorrow as well, and in trying to determine the economic benefits of tourism and outdoor recreation in Colorado, I've heard the number $26 billion come up, I think through Senator Bennett or maybe Neguse. But then also we've heard up to $35 billion. And I'm wondering, what number do we go with when we're talking about the economic impacts of recreation and tourism, and how significant are they relative to other, other industries in our state? What number do you use?
The number we use is actually embedded right in the text of the bill, and I left my copy in the back of the room. But if you
I think it's 26 billion.
Yeah,
is what I hear in your bill.
If you read the bill in what we call the findings section of the bill, which is kind of the prelude to the main part of the bill, and just talks about why the bill's important, we have several figures there on economic impact and jobs, and where we got those numbers from was the Outdoor Industry Association. They put together a very comprehensive report, both nationally and here in Colorado, to look at those impacts. And as you mentioned, the impacts are tremendous. I mean, so many of our economies, particularly on the western slope, are thriving from a recreation economy, and that's really what this bill is all about: is acknowledging that and respecting that, and working with those constituents and those advocates for recreation to protect those uses. And just touching a little bit on what George and Steve said earlier, there have been some misunderstandings about the bill lately, and we're going to work. I've reached out to Mesa County and offered to give more background on the bill to them, and hope to visit with them this week down at Club 20, where you'll be as well, Steve. But yeah, in the provision here in Pitkin County is just mineral withdrawal. There's no other impact from the provision of the bill. It's not a wilderness designation. It's not a pseudo wilderness designation. It just does mineral withdrawal. So the only thing it affects is the management of the federal mineral estate. In other words, no federal oil and gas development is really all it takes off the table. And that's because that's what the counties asked for. That's what Garfield County, Pitkin County, and Gunnison County asked for. Mesa County asked to have their acreage not included in the bill, and we respected their wishes and their right to be the primary voice for their county, and we did not include Mesa nor Delta County in the legislation, even though there are areas up there that folks had advocated for that. So,
great, thank you. Before we end here, Kara, who works with us, suggested that if there's anything you can talk about with the FDA and vaping rules, for instance, or I know statewide we've been pushing for passage of House Bill 1033, which has passed through the Senate. It's back at the House now for the amendment to be approved by the House again.
Yeah.
Is there anything you want to bring to that, or
absolutely. After our last conversation, I think we talked about that last time I was here as well. And after that conversation, I did some digging, and there is a bill that's been introduced in the Senate that would take some more strong actions against vaping. It's led by Senator Durbin of Illinois. Last time I checked, he has not reintroduced it yet this Congress, but I think I sent Kara the bill number or relayed it to her on the phone. If you guys want to take a look at that, if that's
she's here. Oh, there she is.
Bill. If that's a bill you guys want to look at and decide that that's something you want to throw your support behind, we'd welcome that input, and I'm sure the senator would, based on the input he gets from communities, consider whether that's something he should co-sponsor or not.
Okay, my last three, actually, I can't say it's the last one. We're talking about insurance, health insurance. Kara also flagged me for any FCC updates regarding reversing the local control House Bill 530. Any news on that?
Is that the Esho bill? Yeah. Okay. So we are taking a look at that bill. I'm glad you brought it up. We've heard from both the Northwest COG and the Southwest COG on these issues. This is the 5G. 5G? Yeah. There's a couple other FCC controversies right now, but on 5G, we're starting to hear from more people on that. I think we heard from Loveland and some others as well, and both COGs. And I guess the concern there is that as we implement 5G, the rules that the FCC has put in place apparently override a lot of local decision making and authority. And for instance, what the example we've been cited is, if they decided they wanted to, put an antenna up right here in the middle of Aspen, that Aspen couldn't say no, or on some scenic ridgeline, the county couldn't say no. So we're hearing those concerns, and we're looking at it and seeing if it makes sense to join that legislation. Our legislative staff in D.C. Is reviewing that bill right now, and they'll make a recommendation to the senator as to whether or not that's something to support. So certainly welcome any more input on that, if the county wants to weigh in formally. The other one that's out there in the FCC world is the franchise fees. We've also been hearing quite a bit about that. I don't know if that's an issue up here or not, but it is. Yeah. So if you want to weigh in on that one too, we've heard from folks quite a bit on those franchise fees, and that that would reduce local income for folks quite a bit, local governments. So if you guys want to,
So maybe we'll review that, regaining some local control and the franchise fees. And then finally, here on this list, I've got the 2020 census. Anything you want to tell us?
yeah. So we share your concerns on the census. If we don't do an accurate census on the western slope, it's really gonna. Thanks. It's really going to hurt us for future federal funding. Sadly, we've seen in past census processes, we haven't always been accurately counted on the western slope. I think the general rule of thumb is sometimes the smaller the county, the worse the count, is some of the concerns that we've heard over the years. We put in touch with your team and Aspen leadership as well with Lily. We looped you guys in with Lily, who works for the Census Bureau out of Denver. And my understanding is she did come down here and do a meeting with you all to hear about your concerns here in this community. The other resource I would point you to is Lily's team has now hired Brian Meinhardt out of Mesa County, who many of you will probably know from his work with Congressman Tipton. So he'll be working for the Census Bureau on the western slope, and would encourage you guys to reach out directly to him. And I'm happy to make an introduction there as well if that's helpful. But we certainly stand with you to make sure we get a good census count and know the importance of that. And if there's anything we can do more specific, we're happy to.
Great, thank you. No more questions? I think that was a good download there. I really appreciate you coming.
Yeah, good to see you guys.
And if that's it, we'll thank you very much, and we'll keep moving.
Oh, we got it. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here. Okay, we're in public comment. If anybody else would like to come up for public comment, please do. We're going to do 3 minutes now. The senator's staff got a little bit of a bonus. Anyone else likes to come up, we try to limit 3 minutes. Come on down. Lee, I see your hand up. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Lee Mulcahy. I am delighted to tell you and very grateful that we are leaving in 2 days for Kenya to do 2 more water wells. City Councilman Ward Howenstein has donated his time in helping us refurbish those for primary schools in Kenya. It's hard for you guys to realize how little these people have. And the schools, the Kapkasimbe Primary School, it has electricity, but it does not have clean water. We did put a well several years back over a block away, but the kids come to school with a jug of water. I like to point out that we pay for our own trips. It's a grassroots organization founded by my late dad. Steve knew him, and the team members pay for everything. It's not, there's no salaries or anything like that. These are people, these are doctors or nurses or other members of the community, both from here and from Texas, that go with us. I like to start off with a joke in dealing with the City of Aspen mayor and his weaponization of both the City Hall and the police against my family. I struggle sometimes to maintain my sense of humor, but I have 2 parents that had great senses of humor, and I think I inherited that. I try never to pass up an opportunity, both to thank this board for putting the 2,000 signatures from citizens asking for a public hearing on the eviction of our family. However, the mayor has refused to put that in the public record despite multiple requests. The I just received recently, and I'm bringing this for the public record, and thank you, Jeanette, for putting the other items in, but I received a rejection letter from the Saturday Market, and I applied both as an artist and as a farmer, because I'm from a family of farmers. And I would point out that the letter said, "We do not need more lettuce, spinach, or kale." The other joke I brought is actually APSHA's public comment policy. And I don't know if you guys are aware, it was written by the police. And I'll bring that. I think our town was built around the arts. It was built around artists. I think that, I don't know, I've tried to explain this, and it's, it's very difficult, but when we got back from Kenya in 2015, I had an appointment with APSHA, and they sent me an email, and this was, and it says, some things you could provide include records of your art sales, records of showings and galleries and museums, et cetera, et cetera. When I took those records in, the deputy director marched out, and she refused to look at them, instead saying that they were going to sue us. And I always thought maybe the right hand didn't know what the left hand was doing, and that's why I got that. But this was just to cover their bottom. Because the IRS says that artists can lose money and it still be counted as an occupation.
Hey, Lee, we're going to have to wrap it up here pretty soon.
Yes, sir. One of my art teachers was Missy Thorpe, and she founded the Aspen Art Museum. And she couldn't be here, but she wanted me she said this: "Art matters. It should count. It's vital to our community." APSHA always disqualified my art because they said that I needed to make $15,000 in sales. However, this email proves they're double dealing. Greg, I think it's important, when you let politicians, representatives speak for, 20 minutes or whatever, it's important when you're throwing a family out to the curb. And I'll finish up. But what the government does to the disenfranchised, to the powerless, it will eventually do to you. Now, we stand on our Constitution, and we stand on the fact that this government is violating our constitutional right to due process. Rather than take up any more of your time, if you would be so kind to put this in the public record, this is our reply brief asking for the court to vacate the forced sale of our home that we built with our own hands. It is also your attorneys, not John's, but Tom Smith, and we all know his history, his reply, and then our response to that reply.
Okay.
It details the constitutional violations of our rights to due process. Would you put that in the public record?
You could give that to Jeanette.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the time.
Hand up here from John. Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll make sure that's entered.
Thank you kindly.
Okay. Any other public comment? I have one in the back. Is that Leslie? No, a couple. Okay. Is that Leslie?
Hello, I'm Leslie Thomas with the Horse Council. I have one question. I'm sorry, I can't remember. On item number 6 regarding WindStar, at that time, would I be able to comment or not?
This is a public hearing. You will be able to comment then.
All right, thank you.
All right. We had another public comment. Welcome.
Morning.
Please identify yourselves.
My name is Michael Roding. This is my wife, Angela Roding. This is our youngest son, Noah Roding, back here. We'd like to thank you guys for your time. Excuse me. I'm battling recent back surgery and some other health issues, so I apologize. First of all, we'd like to thank you for your time and just bring we were kind of on our last leg, didn't know where else to turn. Someone had mentioned we should come here. So I'd just like to just read a little statement. We'd like to bring to your attention an issue that has been going on for quite some time in the Hoagland Ranch employee housing and surrounding community. Yeah, if you could. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Make sure there are red lights on that microphone. I want to make sure we can hear you. Yeah, should be. Okay, go ahead.
We would like to bring to your attention an issue that has been going on for quite some time in the Hoagland Ranch employee housing and surrounding community. A real estate developer, Dave Hodgkins, has been harassing and making threats to us and others in our neighborhood to do as he pleases with our property/easements. Prior to moving into our home 2 years ago, Dave purchased 2 free market lots near the employee housing units. Upon purchasing the lots, he became the declarant of the Hoagland Ranch HOA and finagled his way into convincing the HOA to give him a landscaping permit to beautify the area leading to his properties to increase the value. However, now that all the properties are owned, he no longer has declarant rights and his landscaping permits are expired. He continues to bully us with lawsuit threats if we don't agree to do as he wants to on our property, and uses legal jargon and lies to fool everyone around him. He has built a fence, planted unwanted trees and shrubs, tried to install irrigation, and dumped 5 truckloads of dirt and a boulder to prevent us from parking our brand new motorcycle trailer on our own property. He has also set up an architectural committee which consists of himself, his wife, his attorney, and one person of our HOA to put into place new rules such as no new building of a storage shed, knowing this is something we had planned on doing. He's tried to fool us into thinking parts of our property was owned by him, but after spending much money on a surveyor, he was forced to remove the fence. We've asked numerous people to step in to help, and either they can't or they're frightened to go up against someone who seems to have unlimited resources. People we've called upon for help includes APSHA, the Hoagland Ranch HOA, Pitkin County Planning and Zoning, and 2 different attorneys. We work very hard to live in employee housing, and we can't continue to finance an attorney by ourselves. So we're please asking for help from you to put an end to this.
Or some type of guidance.
Thank you for your comment. I don't know if we can't really engage in a conversation here today.
Well,
but-
I can ask a
My
question, though.
recommendation would be if we could get your statement, staff can look into it and we can look into it.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, Hoagland Ranch is in Pitkin County,
Yes.
and it sounds like perhaps even get one of our enforcement officer involved if there's was a misuse of a permit or expiration of a permit.
But I think we need to look into that
Yeah,
and see
okay.
what the circumstances are.
Right.
I did have communication with somebody at the Pitkin County Code Enforcement, and they did come out. They asked him, he had dumped like 6 truckloads of dirt and then put these 3-4 big boulders up. And they told him he had to remove that and to put it back to the original state that it was. And I had pictures of my trailer parked there. And he took a little dirt out, and then my wife one day went outside and he said, well, is that enough? And he was kind of, rude about it. And she said, well, you're supposed to take it back to the original state. And he never did. And then eventually he just came back and piled mulch where he replaced the dirt and piled it up 4 foot high and made a big berm there so you could never get back in there. And it is an easement, but it's actually an easement that's part of our property. So it's kind of hard to explain the way it's set up without the documents in front of me, but
Okay.
we
I think
appreciate your time.
that gives us some insight to, and I think we can direct our staff to revisit this and then let us know how to proceed.
Thank you for your
Can you
time.
leave that statement with your contact information?
You
Yes.
leave your statement with us, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You could give it to Jeanette. Thank you for coming in. Any other public comment? Seeing none, I'm going to close it, and we're going to open commissioner comments. Anyone? Would you like to start?
I do. I have 2 things I'd like to, I guess, just discuss. One I had planned, and one Lee just sort of inspired of me. Because this is Peace Corps Week, and I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Niger, West Africa. So I can very much relate and appreciate the work, Lee, that you're doing over in Kenya. Thank you. And just to, celebrate the work that Peace Corps volunteers have done all over the world since 1961, and, hug your fellow Peace Corps volunteer, returned Peace Corps volunteer when you see them, because those are some trying but amazing experiences and years of people's lives. The second topic that I wanted to raise was something that's just been on my mind for the last month regarding a measles outbreak that's happening in the Northwest, outside of Portland in Washington State. And, I have concerns that something similar could happen here in Pickens County, that we have similar demographics, that sometimes these outbreaks are seen in, very educated, wealthy communities. I had requested some vaccination information for our community, and because measles is a very contagious virus, the CDC recommends a very high vaccination rate to achieve the herd immunity, where, if you have 9 out of 10 people vaccinated, that protects the one person that isn't, and also protects a spread of disease. The rate the CDC calls for measles vaccination is 96%. Many of our schools in this community don't achieve that. And in the data that I have, all of the exemptions from vaccinations are personal exemptions rather than medically indicated exemptions. And I just want to speak to that a little bit because, I'm a parent. I have a 2-year-old and another child on the way, and I can understand that these are really difficult decisions to make. I mean, in my lifetime, the number of vaccines that are recommended has, I think, increased 3-fold. And so looking back at what we went through as kids and then what is recommended for our children now is a significant increase. And that can be scary about, putting those shots into your children's bodies. But I just want to suggest for parents who maybe are concerned or have doubts about whether to vaccinate, there are people in this community that care very deeply about you and your family and this decision. I understand you can be skeptical about your doctors and what their motivations might be, but there are other people. There are your friends, there are fellow parents in your schools, your school teachers, your school nurses. I just encourage people who are opting not to vaccinate their children to have a bigger conversation, reach out to me. I'm happy to sort of share the concerns and deliberations that my husband and I have gone through on this topic. And, and just to flag that Pickens County is a very special place, but we are not always free from some of these bigger, scarier challenges. So thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. If I could add something to that, I understand that by not vaccinating, you're actually putting perhaps your elderly relatives or your younger relatives at much greater risk than perhaps even those you're contemplating vaccinating or not. So remember, you're affecting the entire community and perhaps even your closest relatives. Anyone else? Steve?
Tagging on to that same issue, my wife Molly is becoming a Blue Lady volunteer at the hospital. And one of the things she had to do was either give proof that she had been vaccinated for mumps and measles, which when we were kids, there were no vaccinations for that. She had no proof that she had those diseases, although she had them. So she had to do a blood test at the hospital where they could test her blood for signs of the mumps, I don't know, maybe the antibodies for the mumps and measles before they would let her work in the hospital. So I thought that's an interesting little sideline for that. And when I was growing up, we got everything. We didn't have shots. We all suffered through the mumps, the measles, the German measles, the chicken pox, the Asian flu in 1956, and various things since then. So I think I would have rather had the vaccination than suffering through some of those childhood diseases that we got at the time.
You did it the hard way.
Did it the hard way. I got natural immunity now.
Any other comment? Oh,
then just one more thing. Calling All Singers for the Aspen Choral Society is doing a spring concert, which is a John Ritter Mass for Children. And this is going to be a joint production between the Symphony in the Valley, the Aspen Choral Society, and a children's chorus, I don't know what their official name is, are all joining together for this spring's concert. So we are looking for singers of any voice. I sing bass. We need tenors, altos, sopranos. And if you have not sung before, it's a wonderful group to sing with.
Great, thank you. The word's out. Don't be shy. George, anything for today?
Yeah, just a shout out to the Aspen High School boys ski team. They've won state now the second year in a row. Congratulations! And the girls took second. So we've got an election going on next week. Hopefully everybody will vote. There's a lot of controversy about the development of Lift 1A, whether you're for it, whether you're against it. But I always like to say that in the end, Aspen is and should always be a ski town. So congratulations.
Okay, thank you. I think that's it for public comment. We're going to move right along to, that was the longest commissioner and public comment I think I've ever attended. So we're going to try and get back on track. Individual consideration items are up. First reading set for public hearings on March 13th. We have a resolution approving an intergovernmental agreement between Pitkin County, Aspen School District, Aspen Valley Hospital, City of Aspen for the purchase of vital mental health services. And Karen Kunneman's up with some guests. Lindsay's here.
Yeah. Great. So, good afternoon. Karen Kunneman, Public Health Director. Thank you for your public health messaging on vaccinations. Much appreciated. So we are here today for our first reading of an intergovernmental agreement between Aspen Valley Hospital, Aspen School District, Pitkin County, and City of Aspen. Thank you. To purchase vital mental health services. So we came before you on February 12th and did a pretty extensive work session to give you a background to how we've gotten to this place of renewing this IGA or potentially renewing this IGA for 2019. So for the first reading, we'd like to ask for approval and then bring it back to you on the second reading of on March 13th. So I'm not going to go into extensive detail because you heard a lot of information in the work session, but I do want to do a little bit of an overview of how we got to the IGA we're looking at today. So as you all are very aware, mental health and substance use is one of the leading health concerns in Pitkin County. It's come up in a number of different assessments that we've done over the years, and continue to hear this from our community that this is one of the #1 health issues that the community would like us to be addressing. So with that, it was in 2017 recognized that there were a number of different entities that were funding different mental health services, but the funding was sort of disparate and funding different pieces of the mental health continuum, which is everything from prevention to aftercare, but there wasn't really a strong consensus of how to target that funding to really get the biggest bang for the buck. And so the entities that are sitting up here today and the entities that are involved in the IGA came together and really did some strategic planning around how to pool the resources to have the bigger impact and how to have more of a concerted message around what was really valuable for the services that were being provided. So through the strategic planning, it was agreed that the funders would come together, they would collectively pool their dollars together and put out a request for proposals. And that request for proposals allowed any entity in the community to submit a proposal to address anything from, again, prevention to aftercare. And there were some key components that the county was really looking for, that the county with the partners were really looking for, and that was around collaboration and really offsetting if they had the ability to accept insurance and Medicare and Medicaid. And so we could really leverage the other resources that might be coming into the community. And through that process of the request for proposals, Mine Springs and Mountain Family Health Centers put in a joint proposal, and they really did address all the different pieces of the continuum within their proposal. It was selected by a steering committee of the funders as well as some additional community partners. And with that, we've been involved in this IGA for the last year in partnership with Mine Springs Health and Mountain Family Health Centers to provide mental health services in the community for the last year. And so in the work session, you heard a lot about the successes of that. This collaboration, we've really been tracking data and metrics throughout the whole process, both qualitative and quantitative, and client stories, and really being able to track the efficacy of this pooling of the dollars. And so I don't have a lot more to say unless our partners want to add anything to that, or you have additional questions, and then I'll run through the dollar amounts and ask for your approval of this.
Great. I would love to just have everyone identify themselves so we know who's here. And if you want to say something, great. And while I'm on the topic, before I forget, I want to thank Lindsay for her great service for Mine Springs Health. And I understand that we've pulled you away, and you're now joining Pitkin County's Public Health Department. So you're in transition, right? You're metamorphosizing. Metamorphizing?
Just one correction, human services.
Human services, thank you. What did I say?
Public health.
Okay, thank you.
We'd like her
both
to.
our apologies and our congratulations.
Apologies and congratulations are in order, right? But please, go ahead. Maybe since I focused on you to start.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate that. And thank you guys for your support just through my short tenure at Mine Springs Health. But it has been giant working for this organization in this county. And I have never seen in my whole career so much impact that this continuum was able to bring. And it's been, I think part of it is the measurable component that we're able to really see what the impact is. And it was pretty humbling to just be amongst such talented staff who were able to implement the program and really start to meet people in a different way. I think when I first came, it was kind of private practice-esque, that people were coming to our clinic and getting services. We were doing a little bit of integration with the jail and some other ways, but this really gave us a whole new way of providing community mental health. And I am forever grateful, and I will hopefully, even as I transition into a new position, still kind of keep my third eye on and keep my ear close to the ground, because it's important work that the team is doing, and I just have great appreciation for that.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
I'm Elizabeth Miller. I work for Mine Springs. I'm one of the home and community-based, or I am the home and community-based therapist, clinician that has been part of the continuum, and it's been an incredible experience. Really taking on a lot of our high utilizers and more acute cases, and being able to go into the home and meet people in the community to provide a unique level of care for them. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Lori Malloy, Chief Clinical Officer at Aspen Valley Hospital. I don't really have anything to add from what we said last week, other than that I would hope that you would continue to support the RFP, because we do find great value in it as a hospital and for the community as a whole.
Thanks for coming in again.
Charlotte Margulies with Mine Springs Health and the school-based mental health therapist associated with the Pitkin Continuum of Care. I spoke last time as well, so I don't have much more than that, other than it's clear how big of a need there is in the schools, and I think it's really important that we're in there and helping to integrate that care, not just with the schools, but all of our other community partners as well. It's been really successful.
Great, thanks, Charlotte.
Nan Sundin, Human Services, supporter of this initiative.
Michelle Nashone, clinical social worker at the hospital. Not much more to add, but to say I hail from New York City, worked there for 13 years at 2 big city hospitals. So coming into a smaller venue and seeing the potential for real greatness and growth is remarkable, and having such close access to change, and it's just a different experience than a larger, more macro, larger system. So very satisfied with how the program's coming along, and a big supporter of it.
Well, great to hear that. Any questions, comments, motions?
Just comment, Picken County participates in lots of great partnerships with various organizations, various counties, and this is right up there with one of the most interesting and I think so far very fruitful partnerships that we have created. And I know that we were all really impressed with your presentation the other week on the results from the first year of this partnership. And so really looking forward to many more years of having this go on.
Yeah, I would echo Steve's comments, and it was a great work session, and there were some great stories that were told by each of the partners, so I want to thank you for that. And if the public had missed that session, I'm sure they could find that on Grassroots. It was really enlightening, so thank you.
Kelly, anything?
No, I mean, I think, you change one person, you change the world. You guys have really touched people's direct lives in their worst times, and, I can't think of more meaningful work. So thank you just for your commitment to that type of career for yourselves. Come on.
You're just talking so quietly.
I guess so. So thank you again. I'm excited to support this for the next year, and I'm excited to learn about how what you learn can inform more work that we can do, because mental health is a priority for us and for the community, and being able to achieve some real progress on that. So I'm looking forward to those stories also.
I can say ditto on all of that, and the thing that strikes me is how rapidly this has all happened, and how you coalesced, and so much is happening in terms of cooperation, collaboration, and it's really gratifying and exciting to see what you're all doing. So I'm very enthusiastic and optimistic about us going forward. I think I need a motion.
So I would like to make a motion to approve the resolution of the Board of County Commissioners approving an IGA between Pitkin County, the Aspen School District, Aspen Valley Hospital, and the City of Aspen for the purchase of vital mental health services.
I'll second.
I've got a second. Further discussion? Caught me. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Oh, and that's this is the first reading, second reading set for March 13th.
Great. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for coming in, everybody. Keep thrilling us. Okay, now we're moving on to individual consideration items. This is a public hearing, second reading. We have an ordinance repealing and reenacting Title VI, Section 6.23, the Noxious Weed Management Plan of the Pitkin County Code, and Liz is here.
Hello. Okay. Hello, my name is Liz Morrow from the Land Management Department, and I'm here for the second reading of our ordinance adopting our new Noxious Weed Management Plan. This will keep us in compliance with the Colorado Noxious Weed Act and improve our weed management efforts throughout the county. Do we have any, should I give a little summary of what's?
If you'd like to give us a summary, I want to remind everyone that it is a public hearing if anyone's here would like to speak on it, but don't see anybody yet.
Of course, if anyone has questions as we go. But so this plan was last updated in 2010. Since then, we've added 2 new weeds to the list to manage. Several weeds have been removed. Many of the biological control recommendations have changed. And other than that, most of the plan remains very similar.
Got it. Any comments, questions?
I just have a question. Liz, is there any date set for like a community weed poll?
There are actually. Thank you for asking. Thank you for asking. Actually, at our most recent Weed Advisory Board meeting, we agreed upon 2 dates for this summer for weed polls. We are going to have one on June 29th and one on August 15th.
Great.
Yes. Locations to be determined based on where the weeds pop up this spring, because the infestations can change season to season. So.
Anyone comments, questions? I did have one. Steve, do you have? Go ahead.
Well, some comments, and also the weed polls. There are always a weed of the week all summer long, because different things come up at different times. So certainly, depending on when you're doing a weed poll and what location in the county would determine what you're going after.
Yeah, exactly.
So I've looked all through the whole document, and I'm really impressed with several things. The photographs are really excellent, and the photographs comparing the noxious weed with the look-alike plants, I think will be extremely useful to people trying to determine what they're looking at in their yard or on their property. And also I like having the native thistles in their own section, so people can get to know them better and realize that they don't have to be attacking them when they're on a hiking trip somewhere just because it is some kind of a thistle. Turns out it's a native thistle that was here probably before humans were here, and it's their home too, and we don't want to kill them. And I do have a small list of just little tiny corrections. I'll just give that to you.
Okay.
Just to make the document like more perfect. It's a terrific document, and I urge anyone to use it. Now, are you going to do the little pocket version or something, a more condensed version that would be useful for people?
No, so what we're going to do is we are going to print and bind copies of this weed management plan, the whole plan, and we will make those available to nurseries, and we will make them available to citizens if they want to come into Public Works and get one. Romany is actually really good at that kind of stuff, and she can do it fairly quickly at not very much cost to the county. So we can print those out, the full version. Those little pocket versions that are so great, those are put out by the CWMA, the Colorado Weed Managers Association, and we will be ordering at least 200 of those to give to people who want them. And I should mention this whole plan is also available on the county website.
Great.
Yeah.
And when I was on the Weed Advisory Board, I would hand those out to every landowner I knew, the little
small guides. Yes, we hand those out on every site visit, yeah.
And then I also would urge people, if there's a plant that they don't know what it is, to try to find out what it is, to consult with you. They could call you up and have you come and look at something, or they could bring a specimen in, so you could help them to identify what it is and whether they need to be concerned about it or not.
Yeah, they definitely can do that, or even my cell phone number is on the website as well. People are free to, I've had people email me pictures or text me pictures of plants and ask me what it is, which is fine.
Must be fun.
It is quite fun, actually. Yeah.
George, any questions? Anything there? Kelly? No. I just wanted to relate something I heard on the radio this morning about how a study was done in California, and I believe, and they discovered glyphosate,
yeah,
in every beer. I think almost every beer they tested, in every wine they tested off the shelf. And it occurs to me that probably everybody who has a garage in our county or a storage room probably has Roundup in it. And I have some, and I don't know what to do with it. Moving forward, I don't know if it's an issue for you or for our public health department, but are we going to need to do a Roundup?
That's such a great idea. I'm going to use that phrase.
I just thought I'd throw that out because I don't know what to do with the stuff, and I'm afraid we'll use it.
Right. So the county, when we spray weeds, we don't use Roundup. We use Milestone. which is different. And people who have Roundup that they don't want to use and they want to dispose of properly can bring it to the landfill.
Landfill can handle that.
Yeah, bring it to the landfill, and for a small fee, a couple dollars, you can get rid of your Roundup, and they'll dispose of it properly.
I wonder what that means. Is that
And that would be at the household hazardous waste.
Yes, yeah, you don't just put it in the dump. It goes, we have a household hazardous waste management program.
Right.
But perhaps we should have a Roundup where we help people
in the spring before
that.
When we're all starting to think about it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you. I think it's a public hearing. Nobody has come forth to raise a hand. I would ask for a motion. Do I need a motion? I think I do.
Yeah, you do. I'd move to approve the ordinance repealing and reenacting Title 6, Section 6.23, Noxious Weed Management Plan of the Pitkin County Code.
Second from George. Let's see now. I think I need to. Yeah, we're lost. I think we'll say all in favor.
Aye.
Aye.
Now, is there public comment or commissioner comment?
We're already past that point. We already
Thank
voted.
you. God.
Too late, Greg.
See, I was so on top of it earlier, and that was just by chance. Thank you, Liz. We
Thank you,
passed.
Steve.
So these
Okay.
page numbers are the ones in our packet, but I think it'd be
All right, we're going to keep moving here.
43 from those numbers.
We have Ann Driggers on deck.
Page number in.
Oh, okay.
Okay, thank you,
Okay,
Liz.
thank
We're
you.
gonna
I'll take
work
those.
you out and work
Okay.
Ann in.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming. And this is, let's see, the resolution establishing the formula for distribution of the municipal share of county sales tax revenue for the year of 2019.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Anne Driggers, Finance Director, Treasurer and Public Trustee, Pitkin County. This is the second reading following the first reading, February 13th, of the resolution establishing the formula for the distribution of the municipal share of county sales tax revenue for 2019. As I spoke about in the first reading, the background is that in 1978 we had a resolution that established that 57% of the 2% county sales tax that we collect would be distributed to the municipalities based upon a portion of their sales tax collected within their jurisdiction in a rolling 2-year period. So every year we get their numbers from them and calculate the percentages that we are going to distribute the sales tax in the following year. And these are the numbers that we arrived at with the help of the municipalities. Aspen gets 77.1955%, Basalt 2.8128, and Snowmass 19.9917. And they are corrected from the first reading.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that. Going?
So.
Questions? We all good? Anything else you want to share with us?
Not right this second.
Okay.
So it's a public hearing.
And it is a public hearing, right? We're open for public hearing. Anyone have a comment on this? It doesn't seem like they do. We're going to close that up again and come back to the commissioners. Looking for a motion.
I'd make a motion to approve the resolution establishing a formula for distribution of the municipal share of county sales tax revenues for the year of 2019.
I'll second.
Okay, and we have a second. Any further comment? Seeing none, we're going to put a motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Ann.
Ann.
Okay. Here we go. Land use items, land use public hearings. Resolution for Celestial Land Company Limited reinstatement of vested rights. We have, it says a continuation. I need a motion to continue that, or we're going to talk about it first. And Suzanne is here to discuss it.
Yeah, I'd make a motion to continue to May 22nd due to stay.
I'll second.
I have a second on that.
And
comment?
these are all public hearing items, so if someone
can leave
might
it
be here
open.
to comment on them.
And we're going to leave it open for all of
Yeah.
them. Is there a comment on this item? No, seeing none.
I have a question for Suzanne. So, again, we're continuing this due to the stay. Would you refresh my mind, or what's going on with that?
Maybe I may turn to John for that, but there's currently litigation in process that then stays the land use application. They had submitted for their extension of vested rights about 1.5 years ago, actually, and the litigation has basically put that on hold during that time period.
So this will continue to be continued until that litigation is, a judgment is made, or?
Or we find a better solution.
Okay.
So it'll just keep appearing in our agenda for the time being.
Yeah.
And we will, I mean, when it is going to move forward, we will fully renotice that. We've had that discussion, but as sort of the placeholder to recognize that they have been in this process and had applied before that stay took effect, you know, we've kind of done these continuances 3 months out to see if any progress is made. But when it does actually come forward, we will renotice that as well.
So is it, I mean, is it on the docket for a date, for a hearing, or we don't know?
Yeah, I forget the progress of the current litigation, to be honest with you, but it is definitely slow paced.
Okay.
Any other comment? I'm ready to take a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we're good to go on that one. Thank you. Up next, I think, let's see, is Tammy here? She's here. We have a resolution, appeal of a hearing officer determination number 006-2018, which approved the Patel activity envelope amendment and site plan review. It says continue to 5/22 as well due to litigation stay. Tammy's here. Do you have something to share with us, or should we? It's a public hearing, by the way. Do we have anyone who would like to speak on this topic? Seeing none, back to us.
I'd have the same question. Do we know the status of where the litigation is, or this?
A complaint, and again, John may be able to help, was fairly recently filed on this by the neighbor who is the appellant. And again, that was what enacted the stay. So this appeal had been scheduled for this date when the complaint was filed. That brought the stay into effect. So again, then in terms of status and where that goes next, I don't know that there's timing at this point. But that one's fairly recently filed.
Right.
Okay, I'm looking for a motion.
Just a quick question. So someone is suing the applicant, nobody is suing our hearing officer or us? Is that the subject basis of the lawsuit?
It's on the approval, so we are involved.
Thank you.
Both cases.
Okay, thank you.
So I make a motion to continue to February 22nd, 19, due to litigation stay.
Second?
Okay, we've got a
Did
second.
Did you say May 22nd?
I think May 22nd.
May 22nd. I keep on getting that date
May
wrong.
22nd.
Sorry.
Any other comment? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Moving right along. Up next, Tammy's up next. We have a resolution approving the Windstar Valley Ranch LLC activity envelope and site plan review and extended vested rights. And Tammy has something for us now.
Yep. All right.
I'll remind you, it's up. Yeah, come on up. Thank you. And this is a public hearing, so if anybody has something they want to add, we'll hear them. Yeah, we should be.
Well, we might go without graphics.
John, we
all the
may need you to
graphics are in your-
we need an AV guy here, and that's you.
Usually I just plug this in and it pops up. It should be on this side.
Usually it does for me too.
Oh, you want to see? Ah,
There you go.
Perfect.
AV guy and county manager. Double duty.
All right. So, this item is
the resolution for the Windstar Valley Ranch LLC activity envelope and site plan review with extended vested rights. The applicant for this item is Windstar Valley Ranch LLC. They're represented today by John Spies and Richard Shaw with Design Workshop. The subject parcel, as you can see on the map, is located at 2317 Snowmass Creek Road, which is more or less just to the south of Snowmass Creek Road and the intersection with Capitol Creek Road. And it contains approximately 957 acres. The topography of this parcel includes a canyon on the south side, and it's flanked by ridges on both the west and east side. And as you can see, the stream corridor, which is the subject of this application, runs more or less through the middle of the parcel. And that valley floor is relatively flat and broad. So here's a good picture of that. There's a variety of plant communities that exist on this parcel, including gamble oak to sagebrush to wetlands to irrigated hayfields. Historically, this parcel has been utilized for agricultural purposes, with the subject stream corridor providing the irrigation water conveyance system to support those purposes. However, due to those past practices, this stream corridor has been channelized, disconnected from the floodplain, and has resulted in significant erosion. So this is a picture I took this fall of a section that you can see is super channelized and has major erosion issues. In 1996, the Windstar Land Conservancy was encumbered by a conservation easement granted to Pitkin County and administered by the Open Space and Trails Department, and it is co-held by the Aspen Valley Land Trust. The purposes of this easement is to preserve critical wildlife habitat, significant agricultural lands, scenic and ecological features, and also to provide for limited public access to the property. In 2001, a banking instrument was initiated by the owners at that time, who were the Rocky Mountain Institute. And at that time, the wetlands were supported by the irrigation flows from the Walker Wonder Ditch. That bank was never definitively mapped, as well as it had ambiguous performance standards. So after they sold about 3.27 acres of wetland bank credits, the bank fell out of compliance. So part of this project, the applicant has been working with the Army Corps, who has agreed that this project is beneficial to the wetland bank and the Corps. Then in 2017, an activity envelope and site plan was approved for the replacement of historic agricultural structure on the property, and that structure was completed in 2018. And then, so that brings us to today, which most recently the applicant contracted Design Workshop, who retained Biohabitats, who is a company out of Denver specializing in conservation planning and ecological restoration, to perform a variety of assessments on the stream corridor. Last summer, they did their field assessment, and based on the overall findings, they divided the subject stream into 5 reaches and provided recommendations for each of those reaches. So I don't know if you can see that, it's a little zoomed out, but that shows each of the subject reaches. And then Design Workshop, based on those recommendations, created a design which is in the application that you see today. So the request is, in order to implement this design, the applicant is requesting to obtain activity envelope and site plan review approval to restore approximately 7,000 linear feet of this stream. Overreaching goals include improving water quality, improving vegetation, structural diversity, providing gradient and grade control, improving aquatic and riparian habitat. And as well as an additional outcome is bringing that wetland bank back into compliance. And I'll let John and Richard speak more to the design details and the science behind that. I'm just going to go through the code standards. So in general, this is a summary. Like I said, I'll let them speak to it. The applicant is proposing on installing these beaver dam analogs, planting appropriate native shrubs and herbaceous cover, defining a riparian buffer, excavating new stream courses in selective sections so that these new alignments are more sinuous and contain natural grade control structures. They're also proposing to create more of a natural pond edge and improving those littoral zones. They're also proposing to remove pond sediment and constructing a spillway on the lower northern Twin Pond. So due to this overall scope of the project, the applicant is also proposing to work on this project in phases over several years. So this application was referred out to quite a few agencies, including Open Space and Trails, the attorney, planning engineer, AVLT, the Army Corps, the caucus, and CPW. Okay, so I'll jump into the code sections that apply here. So the first part of this application, like I said, is for activity envelope and site plan review. And for approval, the plan must comply with the provisions in Chapter 7. And so the first section in Chapter 7, applicable section, is the site preparation and grading standard. And so one of these standards includes the protection of natural terrain. Staff believes this project complies with this standard in that the activity envelope encompasses an appropriate amount of area recommended for restoration per the biohabitats report. They'll be utilizing the existing roads and primitive drive gravel roads to do that work. They have stated that they may need to have access in areas where there is not a defined activity envelope, and so staff has recommended that with each phase an earth moving permit be submitted to the Community Development Department for review, and as part of that permit they would define those areas of access for review and approval at that time. The second section includes watercourses and drainage. Staff believes that this project complies with that standard and that the primary goal of this project is to improve water flow and drainage and to address erosion issues. A preliminary grading plan was submitted, and again, at the time of a earth moving permit, the applicant has committed to submitting a more detailed drainage and erosion control plan. And then the third section of this Chapter 7 is the floodplain standard. And again, staff believes that this project complies with that standard in that, for one, the parcel is not located within a FEMA identified floodplain, and two, again, a primary goal of this project is to reconnect that stream with the floodplain and thereby improving the flood carrying capacity. The fourth applicable section is the river and stream corridor and wetland section. Again, this complies in that bank stabilization and restoration work is permitted within this riparian and wetland area. The applicant is not proposing any other development besides the restoration work. And yes, while they will be disturbing the area temporarily, staff believes the overall benefits of this temporary disturbance greatly outweigh the temporary disturbance. So the second piece of this application is the request for extended vested rights. Pursuant to Land Use Code Section 22070, shown on the screen above. Oops, sorry. See if I can get it a little bigger. Sorry about that. Too big. Pursuant to this section, the request for extended vested rights can be approved for a period of 10 years. And so in this section, it basically it says vested rights for a period longer than the statutory 3-year period may be considered if, and it gives a couple examples. One being the proposed development will be completed in phases, and the county and the applicant wish to agree on the timing and those phases and related infrastructure requirements. So staff believes that, yes, the phasing requested and the extended vesting have mutual benefits for the applicant and the county, and that this will allow the applicant to strategically break apart the project into manageable pieces, which will help to avoid massive amounts of disturbance. It'll also allow them to do their construction during prime seasons when they won't be interfering with wildlife migration patterns, as well as agricultural activities. It will also allow for flexibility to adjust to any unforeseen, natural storm events or some of the unpredictable conditions that happen with these projects. So part of this code section is the board shall consider the following criteria in reviewing a request for the extension of vested rights. The first criteria is the applicant's compliance with any conditions requiring performance prior to the date of the application. And so, as I mentioned before, the parcel is encumbered by this conservation easement. Both ABLT and the Open Space and Trails Department reviewed the application and concluded that the activities are consistent with the terms of the conservation easement. It was noted by Open Space and Trails that there is an outstanding issue with the management plan associated with the easement that has not been fully resolved. I believe Paul is here, so if you do have further questions about that, he can speak to those issues. But I think it's important to note that they fully support this project and stated that they hope the project will show good faith, and they hope for a resolution with those issues. So the second criteria the board shall consider is will the needs of the county and the applicant be served by the extended vested rights? And like I mentioned before, staff does believe this project overall will improve the watershed, wildlife habitat, scenic qualities in the valley, and by providing this flexibility, they will be able to use more sustainable construction methods. So therefore, staff supports the extended vested period of 10 years and believes the county needs would be served. Staff further recommends that the BOCC approve the activity envelope and site plan and the extended vested rights pursuant to that draft resolution in the packet.
Right. Thank you, Tammy. I want to see questions from board.
Yeah, I have a question. When one gets vesting rights, does that mean that a project has to be completed within that time frame, or just showing that work in progress is being done?
So that would be vested rights for the land use. So I guess say they comes upon year 9 and they just submitted their last earth moving permit for that phase, they could go beyond that 10 years. The project doesn't have to end at 10 years. It doesn't get cut off.
It's the submission of permits within the vesting period. And again, the vesting period is just a protection against any change in the code that might occur during that time. But the way we've always looked at it is, as long as they've applied for the permits during the, then they're good under that vested right, even if the work continues beyond that expiration date.
So then why would we need to extend vesting rights if they're showing that work is being done?
In this case, I mean, with the different phases, we've asked them to come in for an individual permit for those phases as they go along, which, is to account for how those phases actually, I think, play out and make sure that works. So, I think it's just them wanting to be, cautious about that and ensuring that, as each one comes in, that they're still okay under this approval.
Okay, because there's not just one permit, which may be normal in sort of a building.
Exactly. Rather than a permit that we don't want one permit to live for 10 years. We'd rather have them break it up into those phases, so those permits, can be discrete.
Okay, thank you.
Questions on this side?
No.
I'm want to make sure I understand. Should I open this to public hearing now, or do we want to hear from the applicant?
Yeah, we wait. Public hearing is after
Yeah,
applicant, and
thank
we
you.
have questions, yeah.
Right. All right. Thank you for coming. Welcome.
Thank you all. I'm Richard Shaw, and representing the landowner of Windstar property. Tammy's given a very good overview of what the application contains. I wanted to drill down deeply a little bit more on the construction methodology and the specific things that are the recommendation of the plan to restore this unnamed stream. Almost there, Richard.
I think your cursor
So-
still might work there. I don't know if you can move the cursor on that one or not, if you want to point to something.
Yeah.
Yeah, there it is. Okay.
So there's been a long history with the property, and the ownership continuation rests currently with Windstar LLC, which fully bought the property with the conservation easements and obligations that go with it in place, as well as the wetland bank, which had been established with the Corps of Engineers. Briefly, the existing land uses tend to be agriculture, public trails, the stream course, and wetlands that are associated predominantly with what the middle pond is representative of. Most importantly, I wanted to describe to you all the motivations of the project and what its origins are. We are in a catch-22 situation relative to the Corps of Engineers, and we have one of the early wetland banks that was established. It was early in the process for wetland banking, and with a bank out of compliance, you aren't actually able to do anything with the bank, and you aren't actually able to get it into compliance, and you certainly can't be in the business of maintaining the property the way it was intended. So in this whole course of planning for the stream restoration, I really rank the Corps of Engineers as one of our consultants who's been extremely helpful in taking this current situation of non-compliant wetland bank and putting it into a compliant situation. So it's motivated also by a number of stream and geomorphology that's occurring, and past land use, which has crowded the stream in the center of the valley, has resulted in these very steeply cut banks with high degrees of erosion. And it might be important to understand that in the stream and wetland conditions, that it is a V-cut groove that continues to erode every single day of the year, and particularly when we have rainstorms, the erosion becomes predominant and obvious. That sedimentation fills the water with turbidity, and that ultimately is sedimentation that occurs in ponds and downstream of the property. It also has the effect of detaching the actual stream from the floodplain. So in an open meadow environment like this, you would expect the stream to be at the same elevation as the, in this case, pasture land adjacent to it. And therefore, when there is a flood event, that flooding goes out, spreads out, and the velocity of the water is reduced. That is simply not the case with the way the property exists today. And the timeline, this has occurred over a number of decades, actually. A milestone for us is the issuing of the nationwide 27 permit, which occurred earlier this month by the Corps of Engineers. That was totally focused on the ability to implement this plan that's in front of the BOCC today. So a number of consultants have helped from the wetland side to geomorphology and the fluid dynamics. Each of those recommendations was put into a way of keeping the rationale for improvements logical for each sections of the stream, and they're all quite different because of topography and the conditions that are there. So we have come to a conclusion in a series of proposed solutions where at the upper end in what's called reach number 1, we have no plan to deal with the stream at all. Natural vegetation and conditions really are representative of the best that can be done in that section. In Reach 2, this is where it becomes more gradually flat in the bottom of the valley. We want to start dissipating the energy of the stream. So the recommendation here is to use what's called a beaver dam analog, and it's what we have all seen in natural streams in the upper parts of watersheds, where there is a wetland structure that occurs and very shallow kinds of ponding of water that would exist because the beavers themselves create some of the changes in the flow and the velocity of the stream. That's an example of how each of the reaches has been looked at in terms of what is the right stream. And just to summarize yet again, it is a stream with meanders. It has natural vegetative edges. We would use techniques by harvesting some of the existing wetland area that's there into vegetative mats to reestablish it. It's the reshaping of the channel and the reorganization of how the velocity and the stream flow occurs using soft materials and plant materials with the structure of grading established for the stream. The packet contains detailed drawings and landscape for each of the sections of the stream. This, for example, is the beaver dam idea, in which it has both function as well as ecological purpose in the stream. One of the reasons that this fell out of compliance with the Corps of Engineers was the structure of vegetation that existed there. And the original documents anticipated that there would be a lot more woody style plant materials, willows and cottonwoods, none which have materialized. And so looking at the upper end of the pond, that's the most logical place to create that kind of a woody overstory. And the distribution of vegetation is specified in the banking instrument, in which about 15% of the total would be listed as woody plant materials. Likewise, the habitat value in the ponds and the more naturalized shaping of the littoral zone is represented by the plan. So phasing would generally look like this. This is a project of wetland restoration which was completed. This was the beginning of the winter season. As you can see, there were no wetland plants emerging, and even though they had actually been put in place, this is the following summer. So we see the construction activity involving first the grading and then the planting by various methods, including the idea that many of willows, which would be one of the species that would be added here, would be planted as twigs as well as what is called plugs, and that's a method of taking these emergent wetland species and putting them along the edges. I wanted the board to really understand that there is a disturbance involved with the creek. It is short-term, and part of the way we would construct this is to make sure that the individual segments were complete before the next project were undertaken. Obviously, when you see what's involved with the grading activity, it takes some time for anyone to go through the process of reconstructing and restoring this particular stream. There is also a huge number of elk in this valley, and when you realize that we're going to be in the process of planting woody plants that the elk often would browse on, there will be some temporary fencing involved until there's an establishment of the plant material. And so typical kinds of temporary fencing, such as these as shown here in the slide, would be part of the project. In the end, this is an example of the existing stream. It's an area identified by the Corps of Engineers as a reference stream representing what might much of the stream look like, with a diversity of vegetation, all of which is native sedges, rushes, willows, and cottonwood trees. So that's sort of the overview. I might add that in terms of disturbance of the activity on the property, particularly the public trails, The trails are more to the outside of the creek bed. There is one place below the central pond where the stream restoration and the trail would intersect, and we would expect that there would be disruption that could be counted as a few weeks during the time in which that part of the creek were to be worked on. Otherwise, we see no effect on the public's use of the property and the trail system that exists there.
Great, thank you. Questions so far? I just had one that occurred while I was looking at this. Some of your cuts are so deep. They look like they could be 8 or 10 feet or more deep. And so clearly a lot of material has been taken out of there by the action of the stream. If you're trying to get it back up to where the entire place becomes a floodplain again, does that not involve bringing a lot of dirt back in, or you still have silt flowing down that will collect in these areas? How do you replace that volume of soil?
Well, the soil that used to be in that channel at the upper area is now in the ponds.
It's in the ponds on the property?
On the property. So part of what's involved here is removing that silt deposit which exists in the ponds and reusing that as part of the project. Greg would also say that there are locations in the project where the stream would be relocated 25 feet away from the existing channel, because we really cannot restore the channel that you saw in the photograph. And so we would reestablish the channel much closer to the elevation of the existing pastures, and then infill those creek erosion scars with some of the siltation.
And you have enough material to do that, you think, to it hasn't all washed back down to the next property or beyond?
No.
Okay. That was the first question I had. Kelly?
Yeah, I'm sorry if I've missed it in the packet, but can you just talk about, I don't know what the concern is with the management plan and the easement.
Do we want to bring Paul up for that aspect of it?
Because he manages that easement.
Hi, I'm Paul Holsinger, the Conservation Easement and Agriculture Administrator for Open Space and Trails. The management plan that's currently tied to the conservation easement was drafted in 1998, so it's a little inconsistent with the new ownership of the property. It talks about a lot of kids camps and guided nature hikes and that kind of stuff. So we've been kind of going back and forth since I've been around to try and get this management plan up to date. And I think the Open Space and Trails Board wanted to put forth a comment to say, we want this project to move forward, and we also want to use this as an opportunity to restart that conversation. So after that comment came through, I emailed the landowner and got a response the same day. So we've started that conversation, and AVLT staff and myself have drafted up an amendment, so we'll see where it goes, but that's where we are.
Like progress. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just to follow up. So Paul, as part of that management plan, one of the issues is the availability for some public parking.
Yeah.
And so that's part of the puzzle in terms of the issues.
Yeah, the landowner has set aside, I think, 4 spaces for cars. So we'd like to commemorate those spots, as well as the trail improvements and connection of a loop trail that they created as well.
So, so the landowner has already set aside 4 spaces?
Yes.
And is that adequate?
I can't say to that, but people use it, so.
Okay, and that's more than we've had in the past several years?
Yeah, it was a totally different scene when Rocky Mountain Institute, they had a whole parking lot that they made available from dawn to dusk. And once it changed over to private hands, there were no agreements in place to to keep that as a public asset. So that was brought up with the landowner, and they dedicated these 4 spots just outside their gate, and we were happy with
And
that.
do those 4 spots, would they accommodate horse trailers?
That's debatable. There's some people can get around there, though if you have a large trailer, it's probably not going to work for you. The Open Space and Trails Department has been trying to work out additional agreements with the neighbor down the road to try and figure that part out, but I don't know.
So Open Space is recommending to approve this application and the extended investing based on the idea that we're showing good faith in doing this. I'm not sure we could take good faith to the bank, though, but.
Right. And that when we talked about this in the Open Space and Trails Board, we really looked at the conservation values of the easement, and the public access is guaranteed through the reserve. And if somebody had a house there would always be public access through there and on those existing trails in the larger valley. And that was going to remain, and it's already been upgraded. And we also looked at this stream restoration as just a separate issue, and looking at it that way, the increase to the conservation values was something that Open Space and Trails Board didn't want to pass up and make sure this gets through while we still work on this management plan issue.
All right, thank you.
Steve?
Thank you. I'm very familiar with the Bohan Gulch there. We used to put up hay there for quite a few years. So when I look at these pictures, it all brings back memories to me. And I will attest to the fact that that's highly erodible soil back in there. There's a lot of places up on the side hills where there are little gullies forming right in the hay meadows. And then there's very little rock in there. It's this kind of shale soil and the water running down through the bottom. It's no wonder that it, cut such a deep gully down in there. That's partly a function, I think, of the management of the irrigating water. And I think when the Pabst owned their entire property, which included Lazy O, the Windstar Foundation, the High Mesa, and all the part over on Snowmass Creek, they wouldn't always send so much water down into this property. And when they did send the water there, I think the irrigators they would use the water over and over on the taking out at the different diversion points. And then when they finished irrigating up there, they had the capability of taking the water to different parts of the ranch, so they didn't have to or try to keep the water there all summer long. Now, with it being sort of separate ownerships of the different big chunks of land, I wonder if everybody kind of has their water on their property running all summer long, and that might tend to either over-irrigating parts or under-irrigating parts, or creating perhaps more erosion. So that would be something that could be looked at as a partial solution, would be just sharing the water more with the neighboring properties. Of course, the Hildebrands own the High Mesa and the Bohan Gulch area, so they control that much of the water anyhow. But that would be one possible solution to lessen the amount of the erosion there. There's a photograph, it's on page 20 of probably of your packet. It's the one that's looking down on the whole valley, and this probably was taken last summer, but maybe you could verify that, when there were a lot of burned up fields that never got any water. But there were parts of this photograph that it was always green lush hay in it, and there were actually parts of the valley farther up towards the top of it that were also wetlands back, 30 years ago or 30, 40 years ago when we were putting up hay in there. And so I was wondering if you could talk about that photograph, and if it was from during last summer's drought period, that could explain why it looks like part of that wasn't irrigated that normally would have been irrigated.
You touch on a couple of points that the plan has anticipated, and we've had the water planning and water rights associated with the property factored into the stream restoration. There is, because of the ability on the downstream user side to accomplish all of the water that comes through the Walker Wonder Ditch, the need on a very infrequent occasion to have some additional water enter into this creek. And the other factor that creates that is during the rainstorms, sometimes the Walker Wonder actually acts to collect the water that's coming in the upper portion of the watershed, so it can have additional water in the ditch beyond the diversions which are transmitted to the other properties. The normal flow of water that we're expecting to be here in the stream restoration is between a half a CFS and 2 CFS that would occur, and that becomes also the point in which future diversions and existing diversions use that to irrigate the fields. There are some improvements that have been underway by the owner that deal with the conversion of flood irrigation into irrigated, or why can't I say this word, spray irrigation.
What's that? Sorry.
Spray irrigation,
Spray irrigation,
instead of
okay.
the flood irrigation, which has always occurred in the whole area. A more efficient way to utilize water is through irrigation through a spray system, and some of that is underway to change the irrigation practices that are up in this valley. I think what you did see is quite a different regime of wetland, and to the point, at most, the delineation of wetlands has been about 29 acres in the property. And so I would say in last year's summer drought, the reference that you're making in the photographs are quite a bit less than that, because a good deal under a different climatic condition, you don't have the right water conditions for that much wetland to be supported. And the wetland vegetation, particularly the grasses, are the ones that you see being green when other parts of the upland grasses are brown. So, yes, to all of the things you just commented on, the management of the water out of the Walker Wonder Ditch involves many different users, downstream users, and there has been an ongoing set of conversations about how best to manage that ditch and the water resource it represents.
So, going back to what I would call the upper wetlands, which you didn't have identified on
Reach 1.
It was up more in the vicinity of the very top existing diversion structure. Way up at the head of the valley, there was a pretty good wetland there that was, when we would be putting up hay, it would be so wet that you wouldn't take equipment in there. It was, it was a swamp.
Yeah.
And you don't have that identified on here, but is there, would you be creating more of places like that used to be really wet, and once they got wet, there were wetland kind of plants growing in there and whatnot?
Yeah, there are clearly those that remain, and much of the stream restoration is from below that area down. What both the Corps and the consulting team that's participated in creating the stream are most concerned with is not the enlargement of the wetland, even though there would be more wetland created by the plan, which is in front of you. But it's really dealing with water velocity and the meander of the stream. So in taking a 2 CFS stream and reconfiguring the channel to maintain a long-term stability of the channel. That's why the meanders are occurring. That's why the channel, which is straightened today, would become much more sinuous as it's on the flatter land. So to your question directly, we don't show improvements in that upper area you're referencing. The bigger improvements are lower down where the channels are still straight, but the topography is much flatter. And the purpose of that is to stabilize the banks and create the meanders in the creek that will make it a natural looking, appearing and functioning stream.
Okay. And one other question. You're putting in these structures that are to mimic what beavers would do. Now, have you considered, and I'm sure you probably have, but have you considered actually bringing beavers in, getting enough of the willows and alders and things to grow that they would have material to build their own dams?
Well, I personally have no doubt that at some point there will be beavers that will participate in changing the hydrology of the creek. What we don't believe will happen, given the conditions that there's very little woody plant material up there, there isn't the habitat to support the beavers. So it's sort of a sequence of helping hand. Let's get these logs and beaver dam kind of analogs put in place as a way to begin that process. That supports the vegetation that they need and their habitat, and then it will become attractive enough that at some point I suspect beavers will join the fray, be part of it.
And would you fence the elk out so that the woody vegetation could actually get a toehold and actually grow? Because right now if something tries to grow, I'm sure the elk just devastate it.
Yeah, and I think this is such an important point, that we will have no success with these plants and the changing of the stream if we don't get the vegetation establishment without the interference of elk. So we visualize these not on individual plants, but in groupings of plants. And once they become established, then they reproduce fast enough, even though there's a couple hundred head of elk in the valley, to sustain themselves. But as young plant material, they will be cut down, and everyone will wonder why we didn't plant it, as we said.
Yeah. And to me, that would be the difficulty in getting the woody plants growing there is one really good reason why a 10-year vesting period is essential. Maybe even need longer than that to have it fully successful, but to get some willows and things growing up and not being, be fenced out from wildlife or livestock and have a chance to grow would take 10 years probably. So I can see the validity in like doing this phased approach that you're proposing, and because one step kind of needs to happen before the next step can take place.
Yeah, excellent point, because we've got the growth rate of the plant materials. We will have various success because of the amounts of water that each of the plants will have, so there'll be some natural plant geography take place. The areas that have 6 inches of water up to 0, they'll support a different plant community initially, and then willows will begin to follow in those areas. Looking at some of the other wetland restorations that we've been involved with, it takes time and it's patient, and the fact that there is so much wildlife in this valley is a contributor to the slowness of the establishment period.
Okay. Well, that's all my questions for now.
Anything to add here? Yeah, I think that the things that interest me most continuing is letting the owner know and that this looks like a fantastic project. Certainly it's necessary, and it looks like you're doing everything right. I had the similar concern about a beaver analog, is that going to look like a natural thing, or is it going to look like somebody's idea of a pristine, idyllic, unnatural setting? But it sounds, if this is your example of a bucolic restoration, I think it looks great. And I'm sorry we don't have any wolves to help regulate the elk population, and I'm not going to suggest that yet. But I did like the idea about reintroducing the beavers, but I can understand they come later. I did want to bring us back around a little bit to just the parking. It sounds like the parking's maybe been resolved and adequate. I thought there might have been access issues where there were just times when public wasn't welcome and we didn't understand why, or there was no notice. I know that's not tied specifically to this application, but I think we should have an understanding of that. And,
sure.
And how is hopefully things are going to go great from this point on, but I'd love to understand what the issue is.
Sure. Yeah, and what you're referring to is, in the barn was getting built up that was discussed earlier. They had a lot of traffic coming through, a lot of big trucks and a lot of construction equipment coming through, so the landowner shut down the public access because they were worried about issues with horses getting spooked and public getting hurt because there was only one way through that area. And we didn't have clear language in the management plan at that time to address that, so that's kind of where the management plan kind of came in, which we've drafted some language and we'll hopefully get to a resolution here shortly. The landowners previous, the Windstar Foundation, did temporarily close the property for hunting, as well as the landowner does now. So we're comfortable with that. It was just the one instance of the construction coming through. And knowing that, we've addressed that with Design Workshop and the landowner, and we're happy with their answer, which was, no more than a day while they're moving big equipment down the one route and then opening it back up, or while they're engaged in the pond restoration, having just sections of the trail closed, which is fine. As long as we have some public access and that's preserved as the conservation easement does, we're happy with that.
Okay.
So
you've got access issue seems to be, there's an understanding there, and there's also regarding notification. So you'll know when it's going to be shut, so we don't get somebody by surprise that their camping trip or their hiking trip has been spoiled. And
this happened I think early September last year when hunting season came around in November. The landowners did contact us and say, hey, we're going to have somebody out there for third rifle season, and we were fine with that. We don't want people walking around on trails, just like our properties, while there's people hunting. So we've figured that part out. Part of the management plan that we've proposed to the landowner, that we will propose, will have more of a process about how that notification will go, and kind of a threshold of when they notify us and how long it'll take us to get back to them to make sure it's an appropriate closure. But I think we're optimistic that will happen.
Okay, so we've got notification and we've got an access guarantee of some sort, and this is a 10-year. I'm going to say if there's a 10-year vested right, as Steve says, it may take 10 years to complete this restoration. This is a 10-year construction project, so to speak, and it may be ongoing for 10 years. We may have these sort of issues regarding closures or maybe just regular operation of the ranch, and that's all understood.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I think that's it. It for my questions. If we have any other, we can open up to public comment. If there's someone who'd like to speak. We have Leslie here. Would you like to come up? Oh. You have to come up to a microphone.
Over there where Paul's sitting.
Thanks. Thank you, Paul. Paul may need to stick around to answer questions.
Don't
but
go far, Paul. Hi. I'm Leslie Thomas. Nice to see you guys again. And I'm here on behalf of the Horse Council, which our membership is expanding at all times. And they have been, our board of membership has been particularly, so I'll speak to two things about your project. First, let's just speak to your project with the restoration. I have was involved with another land project where we did land banking with the Corps there. And when I rode out there, I was really disappointed to see it wasn't done. So I'm really glad that you all are going to make progress on that. Doing these projects myself, it didn't take 10 years, but we did use some boulders to help. It's your project, so that's good. I'm really happy to see that. I think it's important that I have a concern that you're going to move that out of the eroded area into another area, which will be, it hopefully will look like that, but because it is a lot of silt in there, it may erode as well to some degree, despite your efforts. And then what will happen with the huge trench that's abandoned? And I know you hope to fill it all up with that pond. I don't know how much you plan to take out of the pond or how deep you plan for that pond to be. Because I was very successful in filling in 12, 14, 15-foot deep, same kind of erosion, with just that addition of some boulders in there at your reaches, different reaches. So I have that concern, and then are you going to line the pond, or is that going to remain a real pond without a liner in it, like a natural pond, I guess is a question I have. Regarding the recreation, this was stipulated for horse trails and hiking trails only. The horses during the time WinStar and Rocky Mountain Institute owned it had great access, decent-sized parking lot. You could swing around. You could go ride there. It's a really wonderful place to ride because it doesn't take all day. You can go in there for a morning or an afternoon, have a great ride with your friends. The trails are fairly flat. They've done a great job on the trails, the Hildebrands, And so to not have horse parking and vested rights tied together is to not resolve that issue is, I think, unforgivable, actually, for something that has been promised on and on and on down the decades. And this has been used for decades by horse people. And to not resolve that before you vest rights it needs to be part of the vested rights, And so to say, well, we're going to somehow get the neighbors who are not amenable to having horse parking on their properties, when this property has this stipulation on it. And I think it's really important that that you do keep that trail open absolutely as much as possible, because it's been more than one time that those gates have been locked and people can't go on it. And so with no parking lot by design, that means no access. And no parking lot for horse, truck, and trailers means no access. So it's sort of, when you eliminate parking, reliable parking, you effectively eliminate access. So I would like to have that. I think that's critical, and I'm going to go home and I'm going to go back to my board and let them know about this. And so I'd like to know when these vested rights will be voted on or decided upon. And I'm really asking for that to be stipulated in there, that issue resolved.
Thank you, Leslie. Opportunity to respond.
I guess the first would be to answer the question about the pond. There is no liner in the pond. There isn't today, and there wouldn't be under this plan. By not having a liner, that gives us the opportunity to have a lot more freedom in the wetland areas and the shaping of the ponds, which is what we're trying to accomplish here, so that it has a wetland island appearance as opposed to a decorative pond or a farm pond that is typically around. Under the current situation, I think it is important that you all realize that the question about the management plan is really a separate issue from the idea of stream restoration. And not that it's all not on the same property, but what you have in front of you here is a very specific site plan and building activity envelope choice to make. The owners are very interested in accomplishing that, and at the same time have extended a welcome to the conversation about the management plan, which I would be quite honest about, is a much more extensive and complicated conversation because it involves so many different parties. Aspen Valley Land Trust, Post, the ownership, the needs of the public. There is a willingness to continue that conversation and to enter into it. It is also important to know that everything that's been done on the property related to RMI and the parking lot and the restoration is consistent with the management plan and the conservation easements that go with the property. So it's kind of an answer of assurance and positive conversation moving forward, but the two ideas here, stream restoration and solving for the environmental enhancement of this stream, is a separate topic than how the property will be used by the public, and particularly in the category of parking.
Great, thank you. Just want to see, is there anyone else, any other public comment? We have someone else who'd like to weigh in. Yeah, please. Please have a seat. Tell us your name to start.
I will. My name's Mary Ammons. I don't have prepared comments. I didn't expect to be speaking, but I have, I'm on a very steep learning curve. I am the neighboring property owner, recently closed the end of May, moved in June and July, adjacent to what is now Windstar Valley. Hello. Some of you know me. Steve and Molly know me well. I was their neighbor in Capitol Creek for 3 years when my family rented up there. But my husband and I did manage to acquire the Zabriskie property, which is adjacent. And as I said, I haven't prepared this. I will try to honor everyone's time and be succinct. But to give you a little introduction into me and my family, we hope to make this our home, our full-time home, as we transition in. My children, several of them work and live in the valley already. I really enjoyed reading the plan. I'm familiar with stream restoration from some work my own family did on Deer Creek in the Front Range. It's incredible biology. It's well-researched, and I'm enthusiastic about, the possibilities of restoration. Because I am new to the valley, I was aware of some of the issues that have swirled in some of the comments. I joked with people that I was sort of moving in and trying to be quietly something like Switzerland and just find out all the situation. I haven't had a chance to meet the Hildebrands. And once again, I'm not being particularly strategic. I jumped in to come today, partly to learn, but also, there is a road that goes through our property now. We go by the name New Spring Ranch. And it was traditionally an easement with Pabst, and then the Windstar Foundation. But I will be honest, I was led to believe when I acquired this property that when Adelaide Zabriskie granted the county public access, that shifted historic easements. And in a conversation this morning with your assistant attorney, Richard, is it Neely or Neely? I apologize. Is he here? Hi. Richard has a different interpretation, and I sort of said, wow, I need to come in. I thought I would just write a letter, but I think I just needed to speak up because I did contact my attorney just by email. I couldn't do it soon enough before the meeting, and just bare bones. I might have some other things I'd like to say, but I might like to request personally a postponement or some kind of time for me to find out as the property owner, through which I imagine many of these vehicles will be traveling, what the easement arrangement really is, so that I have my expectations clear, and then possibly reach some kind of agreement about something like the management plan, where I am consulted or at least informed about when these trucks and equipment will be traveling through our property. I've become completely shaky and frightened, but I had more rational things to say. I understand that this would take a long time. I understand the kind of equipment involved. I am really happy to be a cooperative neighbor. I'm excited, and it was a positive aspect of the property to have the public access. I look forward to being a community member and being a positive contributor. Steve and I talked ages ago about the possibility of, resolving maybe some parking issues. I have some options, but I came up against a very simple confusion about what the easement is and whether the Hildebrands have a standing easement and they can just drive the trucks through when they want, or whether we could arrange, consultation, or if there could be annual review. I guess I could be specific. I asked one question, it might really clarify things. When you designed the plan, did you assume that you would use the road that used to go to the, I guess, the Rocky Mountain Institute?
Public comments just always go to the board.
Yeah,
I'm so sorry. Perhaps you could have them clarify their access plan for the equipment, which.
I would like to see the map, if you can pull up, because I don't even know where your property is.
Okay,
I'm trying to get a
I can
grip.
point
If
out
we
to you.
Can we do that?
Do you have a map, or should I put
Well, I have another.
Then George understands process.
Public comments should just come to the board.
I'm so sorry.
No, that's fine. Then the chair could ask the applicants to respond.
And thank you, because I originally was going to come just to start to learn protocol.
No, that's fine.
I'm still learning too, and I've been here for way too long.
Why don't you use yours?
Okay.
If we could, maybe Tammy can point it out for us. And yes, I would love to have, if you're finished with your comment now, we can ask the board to respond. So we can, or ask the applicant to respond, and we can see what we're talking about here.
Okay. So, subject property obviously highlighted in blue, and I believe Mary's property is
Where the access comes through.
yeah, right,
Yeah,
or
I see it.
is it this one right here where the
Pointed
People are a little confused.
this guy?
Actually, this is us. No, wait.
The triangle.
It's really fuzzy
There's
up
the
here.
driveway. This is
Yeah,
yours
there's
right
the
here.
driveway.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
There's the driveway going in from Snowmass Creek Road.
Yep.
Yeah, okay, so our
Oh,
property
right.
is this strange piece, includes this and this little piece here, and this is the road that was a historic access for PAPS. I assume it was agricultural, and I don't know of the other access for the Hildebrands. I don't know if they can bring equipment in, if you backed out from the top of their property. But knowing human nature, this is very, very convenient. As a new property owner, let me, I'm your partner as the county, and as the new owner, granting the easement, the public easement, which is that road, and
You
30
might wanna
feet
go
either
back to
side.
the mic.
Great, thanks. Thank you.
Sorry, the agreement basically gives you responsibility for maintaining it. I arrived and someone cut the hay on the road, and I was like, who is that and what was happening? And so I'm coming up to speed on this
Right.
as well. Again, I'm happy to be in that partnership.
Well, thank you for weighing in. I think we hear you, and I'm not sure how to proceed from here unless we want to ask specific questions from the board, or if the applicant, we'd like to invite them to respond on how this will be done regarding getting equipment in and out. Let me go to Steve first, if he's got it.
The points brought up by Leslie and Mary have made me realize that there is a condition I would like to put on this if we approve it. This is because when the barn was being built, the Hildebrands blocked off public access to the property because they were worried about maybe the liability of people being around a construction site or whatever, I can see the same thing happening for a 10-year period that, oh, I'm sorry, nobody can go in here because there's construction on this wetlands restoration project going on. And I don't want that to happen. I want to have the access, the public access, be guaranteed to be open 100% of the time. If there has to be a temporary relocation of the public access to get around an area that's being worked in, so be it. But this could easily turn into a 10-year closure of the WinStar property for public access if we don't put that condition in. George?
Yeah, I would agree with that, Steve. I mean, to Richard's comments, I understand that the application is really an application for stream restoration. Management issue is a different issue. However, our only ability to ensure that that management plan performs to the original conservation easement, our only ability to do that is to have some sort of carrot and stick. And so for me, this has to be some sort of agreement as a stick that for one to go forward, the other needs to. Now, I guess I would ask, one question I would ask is, when do the vesting rights actually expire? The current ones?
Current ones on, there is no.
There is none.
There's no
But I thought that the request is to extend the.
It's really, it's an extended vested right.
Extended.
It's an activity envelope and site plan that otherwise would get a 3-year vested right.
Okay, so.
So the request is to do it for
Yeah,
10
so
years.
one option to try to address this and allow time for the management plan to actually be completed is to allow for a 3-year vesting right, get that plan completed to everyone's satisfaction, and then we could always extend to allow for what is a very good stream restoration plan.
Comment?
I have a question. Is there, as part of construction permitting, notice requirements for neighbors and interested parties, so all of the participants in the easement process?
Is there noticing?
Is there a notice?
The code does not require noticing when someone submits a permit. We do it for land use applications, that are specified in the code, but there isn't a code requirement for that. So if you wanted some noticing, that would have to be a condition of approval.
Okay. Richard, would you like to respond?
I think it would be important. Construction is lots of different things. Construction for buildings and heavy infrastructure involves a great deal of earth moving and larger equipment, and it has a very different kind of impact. And I think it's important to clarify what we're speaking about here in the stream. The channel that we're talking about in the relocation sections is really only 2 feet lower than the existing grade. The cross sections that go with the grading permits and so forth that are part of this overall package mean we're creating streams that are this steep. And when you take the stream and calculate the width of something on the order of 3 to 6 feet, depending on where you are, and back slope it out, a good deal of the disturbance in the area that we're speaking about is from Tammy to Mary. It is not the same kind of construction when you have to do major grading on steeper slopes. So I would hope the board could understand that through the details that are shown here, that the extent of the project and the construction sizing of the project is, it's not something where your imagination should go wild to an I-70 kind of project. I think the second thing is, yes, to the question Mary asked about how would we access this when the restoration and the removal of the buildings at RMI were completed. That's through the historic easement that comes off of Snowmass Creek Road. That's always been the access to the WinStar property. So from the standpoint of moving equipment into the project, that's how it would take place. That is the easement that allows access to this property. We are not seeing here in this kind of construction of the stream itself a big relationship with hauling of earth all around. It's simply not that kind of a project. I did describe the siltation that's occurred in the ponds, and there would be shaping and grading, but it isn't the opportunity to move fill off-site or bring cut on-site where there would be multiple trips. The equipment would be stabilized, it would be mobilized for the part of the project that exists, and the activity is highly localized. And finally, I guess the comment about whether or not it should be a long-term investing where there would be ongoing construction of major activity, it would be small segments of the stream. And part of the reason the vesting would be extended here is that we have wildlife closures, we have runoff periods, we have times in which there are just physically not good times to have the construction take place because of the moisture that's in the soils. So you could actually find yourself doing a great deal of damage to the land and to the adjacent land if you were driving vehicles at the wrong time of year. So when you put all of these sort of limitations to the practicality of construction, we're not going to have a long period of time to do this work on the individual projects. It is clearly understood that the stream restoration needs to get to a conclusion. So when we're at a point in the fall, for example, and the fall does offer some good construction time periods, we need the channel and the restoration portions completed and prepared so that the next year's runoff doesn't destroy a work in progress, if you will. And so I would say from the ownership point of view, the people really going to be responsible for making this happen, there really needs to be a good consideration that these are segments of construction and that there are limitations to how much you can practically do and be stewards of the creek and the land overall. No intention here of closing the WinStar public access because of stream restoration. A very localized area around the stream is what is part of this project. And hence you have the activity envelope definition and the particular landscape plan and grading plans that show where those localized projects are. So I would hope you would think about it in those terms, which are the way in which construction is actually going to occur.
Can I follow up and then I'll step away from the microphone?
Yeah, Mary, go ahead, please.
Just, I know I've brought up a lot and I was trying to be enthusiastic and I want to say that I want to be cooperative, but I think I will have to get a legal opinion on the easement because I've been given two different opinions. So I don't know how you would like to handle that. I can just proceed how I need to, and I'm really not trying to just kick a hornet's nest or throw sand in the gears. But I don't know if I can have a day or a week or whatever, but I need to get some good information.
I understand. Thank you for your comment. I am wondering if we should ask Rye Neely to come up and give us whatever opinion he can offer today regarding related issues, understanding that Mary may have other issues that need to be sussed out, but I don't know how to connect them to this or not.
Okay. Ryan Neely, Assistant County Attorney. Greg, do you want me to start with Mary's concern?
If that's sure.
Okay. I did have an opportunity to speak with her this morning. When the application came in for this particular activity envelope and site plan, the determination was made that the WinStar property does have legal access for the purposes of developing this particular project. What that was based on was an easement between Pabst and I think the WinStar Foundation, and I can't remember the date off the top of my head. I think it was 1979. In 2015 and then again in 2016, Zabriskie and Pitkin County, and now Mary owns a Zabriskie property, entered into a public access agreement across what is now Mary's property. What I informed Mary this morning was I did not think that the public access agreement made her prior agreement with, made Windstar's prior access easement go away or changed it, but I haven't seen that. I don't know the answer to that. That being said, when the application did come in, it looked like the Windstar folks have the access they need for this project, and I did let Mary know that if she has an ongoing issue about the use of the easement on her property with the Windstar folks, that's really between her and the Windstar.
Okay, George.
So then, right, is this, I understand that in terms of the project itself. Does that impact or affect the way the public would normally access Windstar for parking along the road? Or is that a separate agreement? Or is that?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, is that a separate agreement?
There is currently no agreement with Windstar to allow parking for the public on the Windstar property.
Okay, but wasn't that part of the original conservation easement?
Parking?
Yes.
No. There's not a provision in the original conservation easement that allows the public to park on the Windstar property.
And so the parking that had been done in the past,
Well, my understanding was when Rocky Mountain Institute was running the property, they facilitated a public parking lot. Since the property has come into, I guess, more private ownership, while the public access to the property is guaranteed, there is not a provision in the existing conservation easement allowing public parking on the Windstar property. I know in the past, Open Space and Trails has attempted to negotiate public parking both on the Windstar property and with adjacent property owners to facilitate things like increased size of public parking and the ability to park horse trailers and things like that.
okay, so it was just more for his, parking was available there basically by the agreement or the approval by RMI at that point.
Correct, and I believe the existing parking on the Windstar property has been, I guess, a handshake agreement with the current owners of the Windstar property for those 4 spaces that Paul was talking about before.
And are those 4 spaces actually within the Windstar property inside the gate?
They are.
Yeah.
So
Hold on, Mary. I don't know if I can recognize you.
But the public, there's no dispute in terms of the public being able to access those 4 parking places?
Well, again, the current parking on the Windstar property, the 4 spaces that Paul was talking about before, those are not a guaranteed part of the conservation easement. What is a guaranteed part of the conservation easement, and I bet Paul can explain the language a little bit more, is public access through the reserved area of the conservation easement onto the greater part of the Windstar property and access to those trails and other portions of the property. That is what's guaranteed by the conservation easement. The existing management plan and the conservation easement do not provide a guarantee for public parking on the Windstar property.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Okay. I can't go back and forth all afternoon, Mary. Is there a brief? You'd have to come up if you're going to.
Is this not a separate discussion?
If this is a separate issue, yeah.
This is a separate issue that isn't part of this land use application.
All I was going to clarify is that the 4 parking spaces, it's not, I need to go get the survey and look. I think they're on the easement that might be under dispute right now, the parking.
Thank you for that. Okay, I'd like to hear suggestions on how to proceed with this. Do we have enough information?
The first thing I would suggest is see if there's any more public comment, and if not, close the public comment.
Okay, thank you. Okay, is there any more public comment? Thank you for that. Seeing none, I'm going to close public comment. Okay, bringing it back to the board. Thank you, George. I'm looking for a suggestion on how to proceed.
So, I still think, I heard George's suggestion. I think the 10 years still makes sense for this project, given what it's trying to do and seasonal constraints with that. I would look to some input from staff about maybe ways that, I don't want to invent ways that are just outside of what you guys do, to address the concern about extended closures and where we might tie that in as a condition. If it is through permit noticing, if it is, through some other tools that you guys use on other projects, I would look to consider some of those options here.
I mean, I think in terms of conditioning, each permit they come in for will have a construction management plan associated with that. So I think that's where we would tie in any specific, kind of requirements in terms of trying to, what it might look like to really try and limit any, any times when the public might not be able to come through, or whether that might be detours. And again, it could vary based on each section they're working on.
Right.
I'm not familiar enough. So again, I think that would could involve open space and trails at that point in time, since they're familiar with kind of working that with other public trails. So I think we could, work in language to make sure with each of those permits that at least it's identified, up front, if they anticipate any need to, where the public would not be able to get through on the normal route, and if so, what they might propose to accommodate.
Well, and I'd also like to,
access.
Acknowledge the interest of the neighbors of, Mary on her property, if there's additional traffic to be expected, if those time periods get expressed in the construction permit as well.
And again, that would be a separate issue of notification to an adjacent property owner. Again, the construction management plan would be reviewed by staff as part of the permit, and that does not require any public notification at that point. So again, if you wanted to require some sort of notification, that would be an additional condition.
And Suzanne, you're saying this is part of each permit for each successive element of this?
I think so, because
Right.
then it's right, because I think each one, again, may be different. I mean, and obviously it's going to it could be several years in between, when they're coming through for each permit, so.
So we could specify that the number of closure days be part of that permit application regarding each specific, if they need to close it, clearly there may be times when they would need to, they could make that part of their permit application on each successive permit. So we'd have a picture of that. Now, Rye, I don't know if you had more to add to this. I wasn't sure if you and Paul had a comment you wanted to contribute to this.
Yeah, I agree with Suzanne. I think rather than holding up the progress we're making with the management plan, if we're worried about closures to the public access, making that a separate notification, separate of that management plan, and then maybe once we come through with another construction phase, that management plan may already have some language that lines out when those closure dates are notified to open space. But we'll continue to work on the management plan. And then as they move forward and have to close the property, maybe a day or two, open space can handle whether that's an appropriate closure and appropriate time frame separate of that management plan while this project continues.
And this gives the opportunity to notify the public
exactly
with each step, so there are no surprises for somebody who shows up. George?
I really don't like the idea of even talking about closures. I would have during a construction phase in a certain area, I would have it be a requirement to have mitigation steps taken to accommodate the public access. And if it means rerouting the trail temporarily to a different location of the property, or whatever steps would have to be taken. The mitigation conceivably could be that there's no way to mitigate for foot and horse traffic on the property during that time. But, I mean, I'm familiar with the property, and where the trail is, there's only a few places where it actually crosses where the creek goes down the bottom. The creek goes down the bottom of the valley, so it follows the low point. And what I'm concerned about is that this construction will be used as an excuse that from the front gate to the pond, nobody is allowed to go on there because there's going to be some dump trucks and pickup trucks going back and forth to get to the construction site. And that's what I want to prevent, is any closure of the public access.
So, can I jump in?
Yeah, Tammy.
So, and I might be misspeaking for the applicant, but I thought that in his statement, he just made that public access could be maintained for this project. So I would maybe propose the condition that public access could be kept open. It wouldn't be closed due to restoration work, because I know that there's other closures going on for other purposes, and I don't want to complicate that. But I think if we could just make the condition, if that the public access be open, and that this restoration work wouldn't
Why not say
be a reason for
any
that
work
closure.
permitted under this approval shall not foreclose public access to the property.
Much better said.
Thank you.
And will minimize any disturbance to the easement burdened property located on Snowmass Creek.
So adding that to the
Like that language.
proposal, was something that we could add to our approval.
Just speaking for the applicant, I think the combination of the construction management idea and, this project is not intending to close the property off for public access. So we need to make a distinction between the localized construction project, per John's comment relative to where construction would take place. We can foresee a place where a trail would be temporarily closed because you were doing grading in that particular area. And there would be a safety hazard and a conflict between construction and public use. This is not intended to close the entire property off. And so I think we're thinking that's a very good way for you to condition this particular proposal, and would allow the project to move forward with construction taking place where it's intended per the plan under the conditions which the construction management plan would suggest. So, good approach.
I think you like that. You think that's acceptable to the applicant?
Yes.
Okay. George?
Well, I think that's good. I'm not sure it addresses the other concern in terms of just the issue with parking and the issue allowing spaces for horse trailers. So what did Open Space and Trails Board, did they discuss that or have an issue with that or ignore it or what?
We, staff and Open Space Board, realized that the absence of a public parking requirement was something that just got overseen. And the easement is clear. It just allows for public access through the reserved area so that folks could get to the trail system beyond that home site. So we wanted to be sure we're being true to the easement, not overstepping it. And I think to the landowner's credit, they've found a space where they can allow for public parking, and the reality is just what's on the ground there. So,
right.
So then, can I ask a question that help me understand then? What is allowing these other closures? For hunting or for, where does that right live? Is that
So-
in the easement?
Yeah, so the conservation easement refers to the management plan to guide those kinds of processes. It also, the conservation asks for the management plan to line out some guidelines on public use, whether that's hiking or horseback riding and appropriate seasons for that. So they work together. Conservation easement relies on that management plan to set out some standards for public closures. And that 1998 management plan does talk about hunting. So we're, though it doesn't have a process of what that looks like, whether that's 3 days notice or 5 days notice or anything like that. So later on, WinStar did come up with a system that we just went with. They had a hotline that you could call into if you were an equestrian and make sure you don't bring your trailer all the way out there and you have to turn around. So far, like I said, last year, we got contacted by the landowner saying, hey, we're going to have some hunters there for, I think it was third rifle season. We're going to close it while it's hunting season. And we said, okay. We posted it on our Facebook page and tried to get it out to the public and posted signs. So we were okay with that. And now we have new language in this updated management plan to kind of set up a process of notification days, depending on closure length.
So Paul, I mean, this has been an ongoing issue with open space, and I know they've been very concerned about the access and parking for years.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm surprised that they've taken such a soft approach on this. Are there any options currently that would allow horse trailers to utilize to access the property? Because there's really no other place to park.
Yeah, like we've had past discussions with that neighboring property when it was owned by the Zabriskis, obviously. And I think as far as the Open Space and Trails Board goes, they saw the benefits of this stream restoration as being a huge conservation value benefit for the property. And they didn't want to mix those issues up. While we're still trying to figure out parking, as I said, the conservation easement is fairly clear, the management plan is clear, and we'll still continue to work and try and get as much access and parking as we can, but the situation is just what it is.
Yeah, and so again, I think since this is going to be done in phases anyway, and permits one at a time, that we can allow sort of allow a vesting period for 3 years. That would get the first phase going. That would also allow time for us to resolve some of these other outstanding management issues. Hopefully they'll be resolved, and then the applicant can come back for the applicant will need to come back for the next permit anyway, and be able to extend the vesting rights, because otherwise there's no guarantees here. I mean, the only guarantee is that we'll have a great stream restoration project, which is wonderful, but beyond that, that's about it.
Kelly?
Can we save the applicant some effort and just pend an extended vesting right to an updated management plan?
Yeah, but we don't know what would be included in that management plan. I mean, that's part of the negotiations.
Suzanne?
I'm not sure I can answer that question, but just to your point, I mean, the vested right, if the vested right expires in 3 years, they can still come in and get permits. The only question at that point in time, has anything changed in the code that affects their ability to move forward on that approval? We can still issue permits. So there's nothing with the vesting expiring after 3 years that would prevent them from continuing the project. It's just the question of the risk of, would anything change in the code that may affect this project very specifically?
Yeah.
So again, again, just want to throw that out there, that the approval itself does not expire for 10 years. It's only the vested right that expires.
And they can actually come in a year. They can come in 2 months and ask for an extended vesting rights if we've got a an agreement on a management plan. That could happen any time, right?
They could come in, right, they can always come in and request it.
Yeah.
and-
Yeah.
Okay, George, are you making
No, want to see if there's any other thoughts or questions. I'm just throwing out an idea. I don't know if it's.
right? I think that in the spirit of Open Space and Trails has approached this, there's a good faith effort, clearly. I don't think it's particularly naive, but it was a little surprising because I know we've had issues in the past. I like the idea of a notification, specific language as John proposed, amending this with some specificity about days of closure, perhaps, or so that we know when each permit comes in what we're talking about within reason. So the public has an idea of when it'll be available. Steve, if you're satisfied that there might be some times when perhaps they do need to close it for a safety issue, but it's going to be a limited time. And according to Richard, it seems like such a low impact thing. It shouldn't be very long. So I don't think either of you would have a problem with a little leeway. We just need somebody to phrase it properly so we can get a motion on this. If we're there
I
yet.
understood the language that John Ely proposes, that there would not be a closure due to this project. There would be a mitigation for it. Is that correct? And then any limited effect on, traffic on that access easement due to this project.
Let me just try a motion. I'd make a motion to approve the Windstar Valley Ranch LLC activity envelope and site plan review with an addendum as suggested by our county attorney, with vesting rights for 3 years to allow time for a management plan to be worked on and agreed on for all parties.
Master plan for?
Management plan.
Management plan, meaning the Open Space and Trails Management Plan?
Yes.
I'll second that for purposes of discussion so we can discuss it.
Okay, we can discuss.
George, what would you see coming forth in the management plan that would be, that you would like to see accomplished in the management plan in a 3-year period?
One of the outstanding issue that has been going on since RMI sold the property is parking. And even though the applicant has granted 4 parking places, it doesn't sound like it's going to be compatible with horse trailers, and that property is really a great property for equestrians. And so my hope is that between now and 3 years, that the applicant can work with Open Space and Trails to address some of these issues and come up with a way to resolve them, to ensure limited parking, but also provide the opportunity for some horse trailer parking as well.
Okay. And then if this is accomplished in the 3 years,
it can be
a satisfactory management plan is done in 3 years that satisfies the issues, then would you, now I realize you're not going to be here after 3 years, but then would you think a 7-year vesting to give the whole 10 years for the wetlands restoration?
Yeah, I don't have any problem with the extension of vesting. In fact, they can come back in 3 months if there's a management plan in place, and we can then approve an extended vesting period. I think that's the only leverage we have in terms of beyond good faith.
Yeah, no, I've lived through this as long as all of us have, and I mean, I totally get your point that this, even though this wetlands restoration project, I'd love to see it go forward. This is perhaps our only leverage to accomplish some of the other things that we'd like to see done there.
And it does allow the restoration to begin.
Yeah.
Because since it's being done in phases anyway, it allows the first phase to start.
Any other discussion?
So,
Can I amend the amendment to add language in the construction permit to notify neighbors?
Yeah, I would accept that. That's a friendly amendment. Steve has to second that.
yeah. So,
I would just like to say too, you know, I'm a little uncomfortable to undermine what is expressed as good faith, you know, discussions on advancing the management plan, but, and I would like to encourage us and open space to provide a more fine-tooth eye on including important amenities such as parking when we move forward in projects. The reason I would support it is because to emphasize the real concern we have with what is true access to the property, you know, that does require parking out there. That's my decision.
May I just
Con
express a point of view? I think it's quite clear from the conversation we've heard relative to the property what the county's objectives are long-term. I want to just add to the record that this is all going to be about the human dynamics of agreeing to what the county wants to do. Why? Because when the current owners bought the property, the things that you're describing were not affecting the property, and they have not been in a position to change those on their own. You've heard from Paul that there's an opening in a conversation, and if the stream restoration project becomes the symbol of trying to achieve other objectives, I'm going to suggest that you may not make that conversation as positive and constructive as what the county may want it to be. And with that kind of in mind and that position being said, I think if you were to look at this with a 10-year vesting period with the individual grading permits for the continuation of the project, you have at least communicated to the owner that you believe that the 10-year vesting will allow the part of the project to go forward. And it does not have a short-term fuse associated with a management plan amendment, which is going to take some time and conversation, because you are essentially going to be asking the property owner to go outside of the conditions in which they bought the property relative to access and parking and use. Not that the cooperative spirit can't be extended, but if you short-term this and put the project restoration in the context of leveraging what the county wants with access and parking, I don't believe that that message will be received in a way that will achieve as easily the county's objectives if you proceed on the basis of a good faith conversation with the clarity that you've expressed today about the county's concerns.
Thank you for that. It was succinct. Public comments closed on this. Bringing it back, we have a motion. We have an amendment to the motion. I believe has been accepted. Any
so
other
what
comment?
was the wording of yours exactly?
I don't think I gave very
You're
eloquent.
just adding notification to the neighbors
As conditioned with application for the construction permit.
And just to clarify, I mean, our normal public notice of an application is 300 feet all the way around the property, the 900 acres, and I think really I'm thinking your intent is really, you know, the access, you know, the area of the access to ensure that those property owners are aware that activity will be occurring.
And that, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just think with a shorter vesting period just helps incentivize the parties to get together and work on a management plan that has been initiated, but we have no idea if and when that would be completed. So this hopefully is a way to encourage that. And if you've heard, Richard, I think we're all supportive of this project in its entirety. We would like to see it go. We would like to see them have as much time as they need to complete it. So that should be a message sent to the applicant that we're supportive of it. We're supportive of allowing the time needed. We want to we want to have this management plan discussion completed prior to that longevity of that vesting period.
Okay, is that it for comment?
I'm not totally happy with just doing the 3-year vesting. We could do the same, we could accomplish the same thing by making a condition that the management plan has to be agreed on in 3-year period. If it's not, then further segments of the project would be delayed. I don't know, that might not be the best way to do it either. I'm just thinking out loud.
I wasn't of the impression that we had that right to force a revisit of the management plan. We're asking them to come to the table with us, and we're instituting a shorter vested right as the mechanism to, say in the future whether that conversation has happened or not.
Well, there's been a little back and forth on that. So, Paul, is the management plan as it exists today completed, or is it yet to be completed?
The update to the management plan? Yeah.
Yep.
AVLT and Open Space and Trails staff have come to an agreement on a draft. It just needs to get worked out with the landowner now.
Okay, so there is not an agreement on a complete management plan yet? Or is this an update to an existing management plan?
This is an update to an existing.
So there is a management plan in place. And whether or not it's updated is dependent upon an agreement between all the parties interested in have a legal interest in the property, 2 easement holders and a property owner.
Correct.
Which may or may not ever proceed.
Correct.
There's nothing more required under the conservation easement in regards to a management plan. Is that correct?
No. So the 1998 management plan, we consider in effect.
And it can carry through in perpetuity.
Yes.
Got it.
I'm not comfortable with the stick effect of this. We're going to tell them they can't go forward with their stream.
No, we're not saying that at all. We're saying go for it, and we're giving them 3-year vesting period for their first phase, and come back for an extended vesting period.
Okay, all right.
Again, which may or may not change anything because they can still get permits, and if nothing in the code changes, then.
Right, may not change anything.
Yeah.
So is John's language that he proposed in what you are registering to write down, Suzanne?
That was included, I think, in George's motion to include John's language.
Yeah. I could go with the 3-year thing with the with the protection of the public easement during the construction process. I think I don't want to require that there be parking on the property as part of this thing, because there is not parking required on the property going into the thing. I personally think there is a solution outside the property, but that still would require the Hildebrands' cooperation to make it work. That is the solution. And I would love to see that happen during the next year or two, actually, but in terms of the wetland restoration, I think doing it with these conditions we have, to me, would be satisfactory. And I could go with the 3-year vesting, and then with the intention of if everything is worked out and everything is working all right, then it would be given a longer vesting till the completion of the project. So in 3 years, we could give another 6 or 7 years to, or however long is necessary for the whole project.
Okay, so I think George's motion stands with the amendments as articulated. Nothing has really changed on that. No more conversation.
You know, when we do these kind of major changes, I actually feel much more comfortable if I can see what we're doing in writing before voting on it even.
Would anybody like to take a 10-minute break?
Well, basically,
No,
we're just
can't do that.
adding one or two
we'd continue.
sentences, Steve. And if you want clarification, John, you could just restate it with Kelly's addition. It's just 1 or 2 sentences.
And I think it just changes the finding that right now where it says it's appropriate to grant a 10-year vested right to a finding that it's not appropriate to grant a 10-year vested right, based on, you know, some of the issues you've raised, and that would just get a standard 3-year vested right.
Yeah, and so
I
the
think
wording
that's
again, just to, can you read?
I can read what I offer.
Yeah, please.
Any work permitted under,
Mike?
sorry. I thought I was just naturally echoey. Any work permitted under this approval shall not close the property to public access as provided under the conservation easement burdening the property, and shall minimize disturbance to the property burdened by the access easement.
And
then Kelly added, prior to any, I'm not sure your exact language, Kelly, but prior to any permits being issued for work associated with this approval, notice will be given to property owners around the access easement.
okay, so that's the only difference.
That's it.
Okay.
I'm not certain about the 3-year, but I'll go along with it. I think that to move it forward and get this through, we're not doing any great harm by doing that. So I would like to call the motion for this resolution as amended. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Board.
Okay. Thank you for that, and thank you all for being here.
Take a short break.
I'd like to take a short break. Grassroots, we're going to be back in 10 minutes. Okay, we're going to start up grassroots in, we're on. Caught me chewing. Okay, we're back. Regular Board of County Commissioners meeting Wednesday, February 27th. And we are on land use actions, land use public hearings. This is a resolution granting approval to Helvetic Endeavors LLC to amend BOC Resolution Number 122-2006. Reading on, which approved GMQS exemption for replacement units, 1041 hazard review, special review for a CDU, and Leslie Lamont is up. And we have two items tied together here, as I understand. It's tied with the ordinance.
Right. So, two actions. You have a resolution before you. I need to introduce myself for the record, right?
Go ahead. Who are you?
I am. Hi, I'm Leslie Lamont, Senior Planner, ComDev Department. Hi. So you have two items. You have the resolution, which is before you, and Greg, you read that title, and then you also have the ordinance in first reading. So the resolution before you is a request to amend a previous BOCC resolution, and then the ordinance is necessary because the request is to amend a protective covenant. So this property is 1654 and 16.
I need to interrupt you for a second, Leslie. I thought we were going to make a motion to continue this to a date certain because we had someone in the room that.
Mike.
I thought we were going to make a motion. I thought this was going to be continued to a date certain.
I thought we wanted to have an explanation of it before we did, if that's okay.
Okay,
I think that's where we're headed.
The two items are interrelated, and Leslie prepared one memo to cover them.
Mike.
I'm done.
Get out of here.
Yeah, I didn't know whether you're going to do the whole presentation because we had the public here that was told that it was going to be continued. So.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So I'll just go and you tell me if it's too much or when to stop. So.
Just tee it up for us.
Okay, so I just want to give you a sense of where the property is. Like I said, 1654 and 1656 Castle Creek Road. This is the property, the one that is highlighted in blue, and this is the music school campus right here. And so the Hall family has 3 residential units and 2 garages up here at the top of the road. Improvements are originally built on this property in 1958, and the Hall family has lived there since 1969. And in 1973, the music school divided this property and created the MAA Lot 2 in 1973. And in 1973 as well, there is some documentation in the planning file that notes that the Planning and Zoning Commission acknowledged that there was a single-family home on the property and guest quarters. That was the term they used. In 1984, a building permit was issued, and as part of that building permit issuance, there was some research done on the property, and it was deemed that the 2 units on the property were legal units on the property. In 2001, the Hall family submitted an application for a GMQS exemption to replace the 2 units, expand a non-conforming structure, and add a caretaker dwelling unit by special review. And that at that time, a covenant was recorded against the property that with the language that stated no further subdivision would be allowed. In 2006, the Hall family came back in again because there had been some changes in the code that affected that 2001 approval, such as the square footage of a caretaker dwelling unit was enlarged, the way overhangs and decks were measured kind of changed their original proposal, and they also were looking to reinstate their vested rights. So in 2006, the request, they had to file an amended covenant. The language on the covenant was the same, no further subdivision, but the term condominiumization was added to the language in the covenant. Today, Marshall Hall, representing the Hall family, has submitted an application requesting that the term no condominiumization be removed from the covenant. So therefore, we have a resolution before you asking you to amend your 2006 resolution, and we have the ordinance before you because the request is to amend a protective covenant, which needs to be done by ordinance. So I'd like to turn this over to Marshall if you want to take Marshall's presentation at this point in time.
Again, if we're going to continue this, and so it's a public hearing, we're going to have to hear this all over again. So
Let's just, I think the clarification is we're continuing the resolution portion because it doesn't require 2 readings. So the resolution portion is being continued to when the second reading is, but the ordinance requires 2 readings, so we're hearing the first reading today. And then the second reading, I don't know on what date.
March
Is that
13th.
correct?
March 13th.
but I thought the one is a 2 read and one is a 1 read.
Correct.
And I thought Joe wanted to make a comment.
He wanted to make public comment, and he wanted to make sure that because the resolution was only a 1 read, that it wouldn't be approved today, and he wouldn't have that opportunity. And so we let him know that it would be continued for final adoption so that the ordinance and the resolution would be adopted together at the same meeting. And that today would not foreclose any public comment on either item. In fact, next meeting will be the public hearing on the ordinance, and then because we continue the reso, we can have public comment on the reso at that time.
So, but we can't actually approve anything today then?
Yes, we approve the ordinance on first reading.
First reading, and it goes for second reading. I got it. Okay, thank you.
Another technical question, does the resolution or the ordinance, does it matter which one, in what order they are approved ultimately? Does one have to be approved before the other one can be approved?
It's not that fine of a distinction. As long as one's not approved and the other is approved, then it really make a mess. But you just need to do both.
Okay, now I just want to make sure I haven't
then-
made any promises.
Then we need to have the marshal's presentation to kind of explain the whole thing, so then we can understand the ordinance part to give approval today on the first reading. Is that right?
So any presentation Marshall gives us today will be in the record, and say if Joe wants to review that, he'll have the opportunity to hear that. So
Or
I think-
anyone.
Or anybody. I just want to make sure we haven't sent Joe away when we shouldn't have.
No,
Okay.
no, he was comfortable with the fact that he will have an opportunity to address the board.
Right. And time to prepare. Great.
Yeah, right, he wanted time to
Okay,
prepare.
well, thank you. Okay, Marshall.
Okay, great.
Thank you. If you could identify yourself for the record and the
Yep,
microphone.
I'm Marshall Hall, and I'm representing the Hall family and Helvetica Endeavors LLC, which is owned by the Hall family. So it's one and the same, pretty much. I just really wanted to give you kind of the big picture of what we're trying to do as a family with this property, because it's been very difficult for us and very convoluted. So let's see. So we moved to Aspen in 1969 when my parents started Aspen Country Day School in the old music school campus. Our property has taken a very different development path than most properties have taken. We do not have a large mansion. We have instead 3 modestly sized housing units that people actually live in year-round. Roughly half of that area is walkout basements, so that means that the impact on the site is much less than a mansion would be. We are a throwback to an earlier age when all housing was private, modest in scale, robustly lived in, and there were no traffic lights. Our family is several years into what can only be described as a journey to try to preserve these housing units. Like many old-time families, we are land poor, and our property represents well over 90% of our assets. Meanwhile, the cost of construction has reached a whopping $1,000 a square foot, and it is difficult to get people, even at those prices, to come work on small projects or to fix for the third time the brand new appliance made in China. Clearly, we are not viable for the long term unless we are allowed to sell off a portion of the property. I have spent a great deal of time over the past few years meeting with staff, picking the brains of a few land use planners, and going over the land use code to figure out a way to preserve all 3 housing units. After much work and effort, we came up with nothing. Literally no way under the existing land use code to preserve this housing. When you add in the prohibition on condominialization, we can't preserve anything. This is clearly in nobody's best interest. It's not in our best interest, and it's not in the community at large's best interest. The county does not currently have a prohibition on condominialization, and to the best of our knowledge has never had one. We are respectfully requesting that this restriction be lifted. This is by no means the end of our journey, just the middle of it. Removal of the condominialization restriction would allow us to preserve 2 of the 3 units under the current land use code. One of the houses would have to be sacrificed in order to provide the liquidity needed for our long-term financial viability. So ideally, we would like to preserve all 3 units. We are going to propose a citizen housing zone modeled on the affordable housing zone that provides incentives to reserve what little is left of modestly sized private sector housing. We strongly believe that such a district has been needed for a very, very long time, and we're looking forward to working with you to create such a zone.
Right, thank you. Appreciate that. I think that at this point, we dare not go forward. It's time to ask for a motion. Is that appropriate? I'm looking at John because I'm not sure, but I'm thinking we want to continue this. We should probably do it. Well, actually, no. We're sorry. We can still talk about this ordinance on the first reading. Sorry. Okay. Questions?
So are we doing number 7 and then number 8? If we're doing number 7, we could do the motion to continue right now.
Does that make sense?
But if it doesn't matter what order we do 7 and 8 in, we could do them in either order.
Well, again, just clarify, which is
Number 7 is the resolution.
number 7 is a reso, and that's, and we'll have second reading when we continue.
Well, we'll continue, and we'll have the first and only reading of the resolution on March 12, 13?
13.
13.
So I'm looking for a motion to continue the resolution to the second reading of the ordinance will be March 13th.
March 13th?
I'll make a motion to continue the resolution granting approval to Helvetica Endeavors LLC to amend BOCC resolution number 122 of 2006 to March 13th.
Second.
Conversation on that? Just further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. So now we're going to move on to continue working, or continue is the right word. We're going to discuss the ordinance.
Yeah, explain, if you could explain more what the ordinance, or what the amended protective covenant would say compared to the existing protective covenant. I think that's the crux of this.
Right. So, there is language, like I said, in the existing protective covenant that says no further subdivision and condominiumization. The property is hereby restricted against any further subdivision and condominiumization into smaller lots at any time, notwithstanding the underlying zoning. No owner of the property shall be allowed to subdivide the property into smaller lots. So if you were, after your March 13th public comment, were to amend the approval in 2016 that put the word condominiumization into the protective covenant, then you would be amending the covenant to take out the term condominiumization.
I think you said 2016 when you meant 2006.
2006. Yes, yes. And Section 4-30-40 of the Land Use Code, where it talks about general standards for common interest communities, which is condominiumization, talks about the creation of condominiums and cooperatives is not a land use approval. The creation of condominiums or cooperatives does not affect a subdivision of land. And in conferring with the county attorneys on this, to have put no further condominiumization on this property was inconsistent with state law and currently our code that says condominiumization is not a land use action. Condominiumization affects the ownership of the property. It doesn't affect the number of parcels or what you ultimately can do with your property. That would be a land use approval. So that's why staff is recommending eliminating condominiumization out of the covenant.
Right, okay. Further questions?
I want to ask, what is the practical, if we change this so that condominiumization is allowed?
Now spell it.
I had to read that really carefully. If that is allowed, then what is the effect on your property? Would the person who buys the one house, would they jointly own the entire land with you, or would they own just the house and your family would still own all the land, or how does it work in practicality?
Well, my understanding is that the land is then jointly owned by the owners. I mean, that would be like a very small HOA would own the underlying land. And then one of the houses could be owned by a different person.
So the family who's living in the house that you propose selling, would they be the ones buying the condominium in effect?
Yes.
Okay.
So Steve, you would also, I mean, the road would be a common interest. There would be amenities on the property that are held in common by the HOA and would determine how improvements were made on the property, things like that.
Okay. I was just trying to visualize it in my head, because usually when you think of a condominium, you think of like a condominium.
Right.
It's an apartment building with lots of units in it, or townhome, a bunch of duplexes, or some effect like that. And this one, the buildings are detached and separate from each other.
So,
but it's still the same concept.
Right. So there's 2 single-family homes on the property and a caretaker dwelling unit. The caretaker dwelling unit cannot be its own separate unit per the fact of the deed restriction.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So it'd be condominiumized into 2 units. Right. Okay. Although regarding the public hearing, it is a public hearing, or
no, the public hearing is on the 13th.
Okay, so there's no public hearing even on the first reading. Thank you. All right. Question?
Make a motion to approve the ordinance authorizing acceptance of an amended protective covenant for Helvetica Endeavors on first reading.
Second.
Okay, we have a second. Further discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Thanks for your description. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Thanks for your patience.
You have to learn all sorts of other things while you were here.
Well, Marshall got to stay the longest. Thank you very much. Okay, we are now at open discussion for the board. Items for open discussion. John Peacock.
Yeah, Greg. Just wanted to let the board know we did meet with the Twin Ridge Homeowners Association last night. This was a follow-up to the board's discussion about adding solar to the ambulance facility. The Homeowners Association, we only had 3 members there, but one was the president, and he was emailing with other members during the meeting to get questions. But they did not have a problem with the solar being added to the roof. We answered several other questions that they had regarding circulation around the parking lot and drainage issues on the property that staff is working with them on. It does sound like in discussions with city staff that the city would like us to go back and relook at the approvals to include solar. So we're looking at that right now. Ultimately, that falls under the locations and extent process, but we'll likely go back and talk to them about the nature of that project, and we'll report back to you on that. But since the board had given direction to pursue that, pursue putting solar on the project, and we just wanted to do the check-in with the neighbors. I think since that was positive yesterday, it's staff's intent to move forward unless the board wants us to come back with any additional information.
So, John, does that mean do you have to go before the city P&Z?
No, under locations and extent, this one could go to P&Z, or the council could call it up. It's most likely to go to council because they made the last decision. And then, of course, if it is not approved, then it comes back to this board.
Got it. Okay. I think we can wait and see then.
Yeah. And we'll get you some numbers, but it does look like we'll be approaching net zero on that facility.
Right. Yeah. Considering how often the doors open, that's a shocker.
Yeah.
If there aren't any emergency calls, I can imagine that.
It's obviously seasonal, so it's average throughout the year. In our discussions yesterday, it sounded like, in the obvious months like the summer and such, it has potential to go net positive, and then in the winter months, we'll still need to draw off the grid.
Well, that's great. That's really great news.
That's all I had for you.
We can brag about that one.
Well, let us get it nailed down first. We'll come back with final numbers to you.
Anyone else have a? Nope. If that's for open discussion, I could entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting.
I'll move to adjourn our regular session here on February 27th.
Second.
Further discussion? George? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, Grassroots. We are out of here. 3:45.
Stuck around all
That's
this
not
time.
so bad.